Thank you for this day, Lord. We thank you for our town and for our people and for their passion for our community. Lord, I ask that you would give us wisdom, discernment, Father, that you give us spirit of cooperation as we deliberate and discuss the items on the agenda tonight. Father, I ask that you would help our decisions be in things that would be keeping with your will. Father, all these things we ask in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we will move to open forum, and first on that would be Cody Best.
Hello, how are y'all? Council, Mayor, thank y'all for listening to me. I just want to speak briefly on behalf of the Nacogdoches Professional Firefighters Association. I'm the elected president of them at the time. I hate public speaking, but I'm the guy, so here I am. I wanted to touch on a couple of things real quick. The Firefighters Association is about an 80% participation from the members. We pay dues into stuff. We're able to give hotel vouchers, food vouchers, stuff like that to families that are displaced due to fire or other disasters in and around Nacogdoches. I don't really want to sit up here and discuss politics or finance or anything like that. I want to speak directly what the men have told me. For the past 15 years, us as a fire department that I know of, constantly been told no, no, no. Different items, fire stations, this, that, or the other. We have guys sleeping at a fire station, there's water dripping on their head. We're told that we don't have the money to fix it. There's roughly $20,000 in maintenance for our fire stations, and that's all 5 of them. An air conditioner goes out, that's $10,000 right there. So we've been kind of living, the city has neglected these for so long that it really upsets us as the members that there's people that don't think we deserve to live like they live at their house. It's also concerning that they think we're abandoning downtown, which is not the issue. We're talking about moving 2 stations together. When we do that, we have the same number of personnel. Instead of being spread out on 4 trucks, we're spread out on, or 5 trucks, I'm sorry, we're spread out on 4 trucks. So we actually gain a man on each one of those trucks. So when that truck shows up, you don't have 2 people there, you have 3 people. The next truck shows up, you have another 3. Now you have 6 people. That's on a bare minimum day. And it's just the same thing like Station 3 at the I-69 corridor. I think this is in the same type deal. From what I'm told, the tests that were run, anywhere from 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes additional response time anywhere south of that. Down to the Oak subdivision, down 59 South, anywhere down there. Now there may be a little longer delay if we move the fire station 4 blocks, other side of Maine University for that station. But I know I've only got 3 minutes, but if you were one of your loved ones needed something and they weren't breathing, they were choking, they were having a seizure, a heart attack, whatever it was, try holding your breath for 2 minutes and tell me that's not a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and I also have Phil Mahar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Commission. I'm up here because I noticed there's a voting on the agenda. You're voting on a tax rate. But I also look at the schedule, and you're not ratifying the tax rate till adopting the rate and ratifying the tax rate till September 13th.
I think we're setting a maximum tax rate is what we do tonight.
So what we do tonight, okay.
It can be adjusted from there down.
It can be, okay. And the final rate will be set on the 13th.
Is that, am I correct?
Okay. So this rate won't go to the Central Appraisal District till after the 13th.
That's correct.
Okay, good deal. I've tried to review as much as I can the proposed budgets. They are constantly changing. It's part of the process. It's hard to keep up. So some of my comments may be antiquated. Please bear with me. But some of the things I've noticed that are concerning to me are that we have employee retention plan, don't have any problem necessarily with that, but it's considered, according to one budget iteration I saw, it's considered a capital project, a one-time cost. It's most definitely a pay increase, and it's most definitely something you're gonna have to continue into perpetuity. To call it a one-time cost, take it out of fund balance, is disingenuous. If you're gonna give people a pay raise, because we're not gonna have deflation next year at 9%. It's gonna be there from now on. We need to budget for it and pay for it out of our reoccurring budget. Constantly, we're taking money out of the fund balance, reserve fund, to pay for things that should be in the general fund budget. Taking $300,000 out of the fund balance to pay for an underfunded health insurance program, that's a self-insurance program, is very concerning to me. That's a recipe for disaster when you're underfunding your health insurance program so that you have to go to fund balance. The school district some years back almost went broke doing that. I would really urge you to look into why we're doing that. It should be funded to the maximum every year. If there's any left over, keep it in the internal service fund, but having it, which has to be reconciled to the general fund, but to start plucking money out of your reserves to pay for ongoing expenses, a la the retention program, underfunding of health insurance, is very concerning to me. Another thing that I noticed, and I won't belabor this point because this is an ongoing process, is the certificates of obligation are evidently the tax rate right now that you're proposing includes that $20 million, which hasn't been approved by y'all. Yet we're voting on something to maximize at this point. When you look at that certificate of obligation in your budget, one of the things it says is over $1 million for annual storm system repairs. Now, if we're going to do annual repairs, let's not finance it over 20 to 25 years. That should be in your regular budget. If we start issuing certificates of obligation to finance things that are maintenance and repairs, there's nothing but rates are going to go up, things aren't going to get done. We're just going to say, well, we can't afford it, we'll issue another bond. I wish that y'all would look into the total budget and balancing the budget, not digging into reserves for payroll, underfunding of your health insurance program, annual sewer repairs don't need to come out of a bond election. And I know this is an ongoing process and I plan on staying involved, but if there's a vote tonight, you need to consider what you're doing here. And I won't belabor this, I'll be back later to address it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Are there items to be removed from the consent agenda? And I'm sorry, I didn't point out, Councilmember Bellinger is remote tonight. She's with us on the screen and can hear and can talk when she has something to say. So anyway, I want to point that out. So we do have a quorum of 4. So
I would ask that we remove items E and F from the consent agenda, please.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Do I have a motion that we approve the consent agenda without approving E and F?
Make a motion, we approve the consent agenda without E and F.
All right. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Thank you. Those in favor, any discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. All right. So we will go to number 5E, consider approval of a contract between the City of Nacogdoches and Chastang Ford for the purchase of 7 fleet vehicles by buy-board contract, purchasing contract specialist. Mr. Flores, how are you tonight?
Good evening, council members. How are y'all?
Good.
Good.
So yes, we're looking at entering into a contract with Chastang Ford for the purchase of 7 fleet vehicles. This has been an ongoing mission of mine for the past 10 months here as the purchasing specialist to find some fleet vehicles for the city. I'm sure y'all are no strangers to the supply issues we're having as well as the demand issues we're having at the same time, and then some materials crises we're having at the same time. So what I did was look to Buy Board to see if we could find somebody that would make it easier for us to acquire those vehicles in a quicker time frame. All of these vehicles are budgeted, and I have attached a vehicle request quote sheet with the item, and I will answer any questions that you guys have or anyone else has.
I guess I'll go first since I asked to have it removed. You said these are budgeted items that we already had in our 21-22 operating budget. What are these vehicles being used for?
So it looks like we have two that are going, okay, so I guess I should preface by saying that these are to replace vehicles that are currently in use. I've been speaking with a lot of department heads, and all of these vehicles have been in extreme use and are looking to be phased out, maybe moved to another department, and these vehicles take that position over. So as I was going to say before I mentioned that, we have two to inspections, one to utility construction, sanitation administration, one more to utility construction, animal shelter, and parks and cemeteries. I've been working very closely with these departments, and I've tried as hard as I could to accommodate for their requests for vehicles. As I said initially, we're having quite an issue right now with meeting some of their requests. So of those, like I said, of those 7, there's 4 that aren't actually being acquired yet. That's because we're looking at getting some 3/4 ton trucks that are more apt to pulling large equipment. That has been the hardest thing to come across. It looks like what our best bet is going to be to get those in an order opening, which is going to be in October. I've been working with Chastang Ford for the past couple of weeks to acquire what we could and work with the departments in tandem to get them what they feel like would at least get them where they could where they could get back on the road and running. We have issues that are putting these vehicles in the shop for 2 to 4 weeks at a time. What I've done essentially is stay as close as I could possible, and they have made some sacrifices. Another issue is the reason that I've noticed that this budget amendment is needed is because when they're budgeting for a vehicle that's $36,000 and they need an extra $17,450, we can't find the vehicles to accommodate that $36,000 budget, but we can find one that's for $37,450. And it usually comes down to a technology package, or it comes down to a towing package that's added to it. So does that answer your question?
It does, and I was making sure that I was correct in that the budget amendment that we will adopt in F is related to these vehicles.
One quick question on, now, your responsibility is finding the vehicles, correct?
Yes, sir.
So it's the department heads that requested vehicles for their department, correct?
Sure, yes,
So
absolutely.
they are the ones that would be able to tell us what the use of that vehicle is.
Yes, when I first ventured into or forayed into this, I created a spreadsheet that outlined the utilization of the vehicle, the year, the mileage, cross-referenced how much of each, and then kind of determined from there what they would need. So when I say I've been working very closely with them, it was probably the best experience I could get with meeting all of the department heads and having close coordination with them to get what they need. As I said, it's not 100% what they need, but they are very thankful that we were able to get these at this point, and I've received some pretty good enthusiasm from the departments.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So I guess an added question is, are we going to expect this in our coming operating budget when we buy vehicles that we're going to have? Are we planning for these cost increases in the budget as opposed to having to amend it later? Ms. Curbo, I'm really asking that to you.
So we have tried to do that as we go through the process. Every department head calls and tries to get quotes, and the problem is they change significantly. We don't want to ask for 40% more, but at the same time we try to get something that is somewhat within what we expect the price range to be. Our problem this year has been finding vehicles at all. Regardless of the cost. If you'll recall, we did a bid and we had only one respondent and it wasn't any good, and so we had to start all over. And up until last week or week before, we didn't think we were gonna find any vehicles. All the dealers that we had been working with, nobody had any, and they didn't have any way to provide these. And so, we were very surprised that we were gonna get these. We thought these were gonna roll to next year as well. So we're trying, but yeah, who knows what's gonna happen next year by the time we actually get to the point where we can order the next round.
Well, I certainly understand the supply constraints that we have. We're getting 7 vehicles for what last year might have, or 2 years ago, might have been the price of 8. So, I mean, that's the
Yeah.
simple math.
It
Yeah.
is, it is.
Thank you.
Councilmember Bellinger, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Mr. Flores. Appreciate it. I assume that first of all, where is this vendor located?
I'm sorry, one more time. Where's the vendor located?
Yes.
It's located in Houston.
Okay, and I assume we did try to work with local vendors to try and come up with those. I know we talked about that in the past. Could you?
Yes, ma'am. So 3 months prior, I actually went through the typical bidding process of advertising, soliciting an RFP, and then compiling those vendors' proposals and bringing it forward to you guys. I received one out of, I believe it was 20. So I worked with Pam and Mario to determine which dealerships we should go with, and it ended up being our county and all adjacent counties, which summed up to about 20 dealerships. Of those 20, I received instant rejections, and then at the end of the bid closing, I received one proposal from Lufkin Ford, and unfortunately, their proposal did not meet the criteria that we required to actually consider it to be a proper proposal. So it was at that position that I began to redo the process, and it was when I started working with dealerships outside of those criteria and recognized that if we didn't essentially get a reservation of the vehicles within a time frame of, I'd say, 3 days or less, the vehicles would be gone. So small anecdotal piece. Last Friday, I spoke with Chastain Ford, and they had 3 vehicles. There were 3 of the new Ford Mavericks. They were excellent vehicles. On Monday, they were gone. So I had to work really quickly to get 3 more of comparable size and pricing back on the list and get a PO to them so they could reserve these vehicles. So the locality thing really wasn't able to work well for us because the time frame had to be so tight. That's why I moved more towards the buy board, because we could circumvent that entire process and get vehicles in this manner. I believe that in ideal scenarios, I would work with local vendors to get them, but working with the local vendors here in Nacogdoches, there were some that were just simply not able to make any more orders. The banks for the 2022's closed, and even if we got some, I've had issues with them being canceled or moved to the 2023 year. So that's really why we didn't look towards the local preference as much as we did the buy board contracting, because it was quicker and easier for me to get in front of you guys and get an approval for these vehicles before they disappeared.
Well, thank you both for your work in the past, but also in the future for trying to see what we can do to work with our local vendors. I know it's a real challenge. They have supply issues too. So thank you for everything you do to try and keep our business here locally, though I understand the buy board has significant advantages. So thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Any more questions on E and F? I assume we can handle those potentially as one? Or do you?
I have no problem with that.
Nope. Okay. Do I have a motion?
I move to to accept that item. I don't have it in front of me.
There are 5E and 5F.
Thank you, 5E and 5F.
Thank
To
you.
approve those items.
Okay.
I'll second that motion.
Have a second? All right. Any more discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. All right. Thank you, sir. All right, we'll move to 6A. And unfortunately, again, we are unable to consider 6A. I have a conflict of interest on that item. And so according to council, we must have 3 council people, a quorum of 3 in person to deliberate an item. And so we will pass on 6A until September the 20th, 2022.
Mayor Mize, can I say something here?
Yes, ma'am.
I do want to apologize profusely. I offered to come in with a hazmat suit to enable this to happen, but anyway, I'm so sorry we have COVID, and I hated this to be moved, but my apologies.
We appreciate you being online. We'll move to 6B, public hearing. Consider a request for a zone change from I-2 heavy industrial to R4 multifamily for approximately 3 acres, being a portion of Lot 5 of the OTR Place subdivision, generally located on the west side of the Old Tyler Road, approximately 850 feet north of Power Street. This request has been made by Universal Construction and Remodeling LLC, case number ZON 2022-07. City Planner.
Thank you, Mayor. Elena Helton, City Planner. As stated, this is 3 acres out of a 7-acre tract known as Lot 5 of the OTR subdivision. Again, this is on the west side of Old Tyler Road, just north of Power Street. The majority of the zoning in this area is R4 multifamily, the majority of which has been in place since the 1970s. It does appear that there was a zone change in the late 90s, early 2000s to change the portion of the property that you see as multifamily to that designation. So at one point, all of Old Tyler Road was industrial, and then a portion of it was rezoned multifamily. But we do have this remainder left that's still zoned I-2 heavy industrial, which is a portion of the property that the applicant is requesting to change to R4. The existing uses in the area include city utility facilities, single-family elementary school just to the west, and then there's a large conservation and preservation lot that borders the property on the west side that's meant to be preserved in perpetuity for natural vegetation and erosion control and so forth and so on. But other than that, the majority of the properties immediately in the area are undeveloped, with some residential and public uses located to the west. So when we look at the map, there is a significant portion of floodplain just north of the property. That's a tributary of Bonita Creek. And whenever we look at the future land use plan in a minute, you'll see that that area is shown as green or agricultural, which is common for properties that are encumbered by environmental features or have a lack of access or things like that. So property to the north is essentially undevelopable because of that tributary. And then again, that property located to the west is a conservation lot that's meant to be maintained in its natural state. So just to give you an idea of kind of the character of the surrounding properties. And again, this is just to highlight that area, that conservation lot, to show you kind of the size. This also creates a natural buffer between the subject property and some of those existing single-family homes that front onto North Sanders Street. The future land use plan does designate this property as single-family, and you see that green, that's basically the area that follows that floodplain in the creek area. Single-family land use is, again, traditionally single-family detached dwelling units. However, the comprehensive plan does go on to state that the future land use plan is not a parcel-by-parcel specific mandate for zoning, and so you have to take into consideration the context of the current zoning and developed uses in the area. It also goes on to say that the zone change can still receive a favorable recommendation, even if it's not reflected on the plan, if it meets the land use policies of the zoning ordinance, and also if it meets the goals and objectives of the zoning ordinance. And so in this case, while the plan doesn't depict multifamily on this property, the request does meet a number of the goals and objectives of the land use chapter, including encouraging growth inward, where you're encouraging property to be developed that already has access to infrastructure, also avoiding undesirable development outcomes. And so R4 multifamily is much more compatible with the adjacent uses and zoning in the area than I-2 heavy industrial. I-2 heavy industrial is the city's most intense zoning district. It allows for very intense commercial and industrial uses. Several of those uses have the high propensity to create nuisances associated with noise or odor or vibration. And so in general, industrial uses aren't compatible in close proximity to residential areas or properties that are zoned residential. Again, land use policies, if you look under the general and residential land use policies, it talks about compatibility with existing uses. So maintaining compatibility with the proposed zoning versus the existing development in the area, and also furthers the goal of providing schools, parks, and community facilities that are in close proximity to residential areas. So just wanted to highlight some of those goals and objectives that are found in the comprehensive plan. These are some site photos of the area. You can see the property is currently undeveloped, and the majority of the character of the property on the west side of Old Tyler Road is rural in nature. This property has a lot of dramatic, I would call it dramatic or steep topography, making it really just developable on the front side of it, with the backside really having some issues as far as grading and terrain. Again, these are just some street views from Old Tyler Road. These are some images of some of the adjacent development. So in the photo on the top, you can see this is actually a historic site. This is the site of the original city water utility facility that was existing back in the 1920s. Ever since then, it's been rehabbed into new uses, but it is in a historic district. And so that's that red barn area that you see. And then there's a brick building in the distance that I think we'll get a picture of in just a minute. There they are. So in the lower right-hand corner, again, that's a historical site. And in the upper left-hand corner, that's a vacant a lumberyard that's further to the north as well. So these are just some character photos of the adjacent properties. So the approval criteria for zone changes and specific use permits are those that are outlined on your screen. We did want to highlight just a couple of those. That being number 1, which is compatibility with adjacent development, and number 5, nuisances. So ensuring adequate nuisance prevention. Again, the uses that are permitted under the I-2 heavy industrial zoning district are very intense. They include several mining, extraction, manufacturing uses that could create a nuisance to some of the adjacent land uses in the area. And R4 we find is just much more compatible with the zoning of adjacent property and some of those residential uses that are already developed. As part of the notification process, we sent 10 letters to property owners within the 200-foot area. We also sent courtesy postcards to property owners within 500 feet. We placed a sign on the property, and we also advertised this item on social media and our city website. We didn't receive any written responses. However, we did have 2 residents attend the August Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. One of those residents had a concern about traffic, and we did discuss that at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Essentially, any development that includes 50 units or more actually triggers a traffic impact analysis, where the applicant has to submit a study that's prepared by a civil engineer or a transportation engineer demonstrating the impact of that development on the adjacent roadway, and then proposing any kind of improvements to mitigate that impact. But that doesn't come till we get to the actual permitting sign, because at this point we don't know what's going to be proposed. The other question was about environmental issues. So again, the property to the east across Old Tyler Road is old industrial sites, and there are some environmentally affected properties on that side, but this property that we're reviewing this evening doesn't have any kind of previous environmental impacts that would be a issue for development in the future. And again, just staff recommends approval of the request based on those criteria that we outlined previously and in the staff report. The applicant representative is in attendance if the council should have any questions. And with that, I'll conclude our presentation and open it up for questions from the council.
Maybe public comment first.
All right.
Does anyone like to speak to this item? Okay. Council?
I was sort of surprised we didn't have someone to speak up. But anyway, I had spoke to, you said you sent out 10 letters, and there was 2 letters should have went to residents.
We sent 10 letters to property owners within the 200 feet. Some of those property owners live in that area. Some of them live in other areas of the city, so not all of those properties were owner occupied. When we look at the map, this kind of gives you an idea of the makeup of those. So there is one single-family owner-occupied home located to the south that received a letter, and then one across the street on Old Tyler Road. The other properties were either undeveloped or were rental occupied, so the property owner got a letter, but the resident didn't necessarily get a letter. But those zoning signs that we post generally help create more local awareness, and so that just to generate questions or phone calls about the request.
I had spoke to one of the homeowners, and they indicated that they would have objected. They came to the meeting, Planning and Zoning Committee meeting, and their concern was, and is, if there was going to be Section 8 housing. you know, we don't know that as of it stands today, but that was one of their concerns. And did they indicate that to you, anybody?
No, we haven't received any indication of the type or character of the housing, just that it's for future residential development.
And the owners of the property hasn't given any indication as their intended use?
No.
Thank you.
Councilmember Bellinger?
Oh,
Oh, I'm
excuse
sorry.
me,
Go
someone
ahead.
raised their
Oh.
hand. Oh,
Hello, I'm Deborah Leonard, and I own 902, 906, 910, and 926 Old Tyler Road. So I'm across the street from the area we're talking about. And I guess I just want to say, you know, I realize somebody's going to come and take pictures, but they show a picture of a red storage building. I mean, this is my home. There's a brick house. There's a house built in, or a building built in 1908. The original cement tank is there. I mean, it's just a charming, it's my home. It's a charming piece of property. Not that anybody here is going to care, but it's like the picture they chose to show shows a storage building. It's not the home. It's a historic site. It was the power plant to the city of Nacogdoches and then the water plant, and we bought it and restored it as our home. And we're totally zoned heavy industrial. So I know they say it's mostly residential around. Well, everything across the street is heavy industrial. We're not zoned resident. We're grandfathered in for a house and a garage. The only thing I brought up at the last Monday's meeting was, and I'm totally new to this, I apologize, but it didn't make sense to me that we're voting on something when they don't know what they're even going to do with it. I guess that just didn't make sense to me. I guess maybe that's the first step, but I'd like to know what's going to go in there. I've been there, well, it'll be 20 years in February, you know, and I love our place. I love that it's all natural woods over there. And knowing that you can't do anything up the property because of the elevation and some, I think there's some kind of pond or something up there that has something that only grows there, you know, so I mean, I know you can't do anything. Anyway, I guess I just want to clear the air that we're heavy industrial and we have a charming home. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to that?
Yes, so, and I thank her for speaking. I did speak to her husband at the meeting, and he actually pushed me about changing the zoning for their property to single-family in order to bring some of those existing single-family uses into compliance. And so we're supposed to be having a future meeting about actually initiating a zone change for that I-2 on the east side of Old Tyler Road to single-family to essentially bring the property into conformity with those single-family residences. So the historic overlay, essentially it's an additional layer on top of that zoning district. So any type of exterior improvements to the property has to go through our Historic Landmark and Preservation Committee, which they have done several times. But it doesn't necessarily affect the zoning or those uses that are permitted under that district. And we did talk about the potential impact of this property on the west side, how it could affect the property on the east side. And essentially, I think the desire was to change that zoning as well, to be more in line with what's actually on the ground. And to speak to the potential uses, so again, the applicant hasn't submitted any plans. And, you know, the first step is the zoning, and then they'll engage an engineer to see what's feasible on the property, because there is some steep terrain and some topographical challenges on the property that require an engineer to really do an evaluation of what's possible. And so at this point, it's, I think, a little bit preliminary for that process, because they wanted to make sure they had the zoning approvals first before they spent the money on engaging an engineer. But this developer has developed primarily duplexes in the community. But again, until they really get a more detailed evaluation of what can be done on the property, we haven't seen a proposal. I hope that answers your question, or the lady's question in the audience.
Okay. All right. Ms. Bellinger?
Will you come back to me?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Chuckley?
I guess my question, Ms. Helton, and maybe Mr. Kirkland, is it appropriate for us to ask the applicant to kind come and share what his potential plans might be, even if they're not concrete? I mean, is that?
I was just looking in the audience.
He's here.
Oh, okay, good. All right. I'll step aside.
Mr. Mayor, council members, how are y'all this evening? I'm RJ Bohack. My business address is 800 North Street. So what the plans are with this right now, honestly, what we're trying to do, I'm not the developer, I'm just helping with the zoning part of it. And just what it is obviously the I-2, limits it to 2 or 3 acres there roughly. That's realistically not usable. And so the intention is just to have it all the same, what's uniform there. There, and like Elena had spoken about, there's pretty steep topography there, so it's pretty limited what can actually be used there. The lot is about 1,000 foot long. It's about 300 foot deep. But if you look at the topography map, it's roughly you might get 50 to 75 foot into that property, because then it goes straight up. It's about a 50-foot cliff, and so it's not advantageous to cut into that and do retaining walls and that sort of thing. So as far as what's going to be put there, don't know yet, to be honest with you. Just honestly, what we're trying to do is make sure that it can all be used, as R4, and then from there go to the engineer and figure out, topographical maps and figuring that out. But ultimately, this is just kind of a preliminary step. So,
Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Ms.
I
Hamilton?
had a brief question. Should I?
Yes, go ahead, sure.
I have been concerned about water, what happens to our water. We have so much, so many issues with water in our city and protecting our environment. Could you go into that pond and what needs to be protected and how it might be protected?
Sure. If I may, I'm going to ask our city engineer, Steve Bartlett, to come up and address the council so he can talk about that
And
in
if
more
there are other
detail.
water,
Yes, thank you.
if there are other water issues too, so.
Steve Bartlett, Director of Public Works and City Engineer. So the pond that you're seeing to the south is kind of a small overgrown pond that's been there for a long time. So I don't think it holds a whole lot of benefit or value for any future development. Actually, I've talked to several people who have looked at those tracks, and all of their plans included eliminating that pond if it was possible. So that's the only water body in the area. The old mill pond, of course, has been breached, and so to the north in the park, that's just an open area now. So at this point, I don't know. I guess was your question that would the development impact the pond, Councilman?
I had thought I'd heard earlier that there were some issues about protecting some of the water, but I may have misheard it.
Now, I think, and this drains very, very well to the street. This track drains down the hill and directly almost into the street. So very little, if any, of the drainage from this, regardless of the type of development, would end up in that pond area.
So what would be the requirements of retention or detention if it's developed?
Sure. So we have, and have since 1992, stormwater regulations. Those include on-site detention for any development that exceeds 14,000 square feet of impervious area, like roofs and sidewalks and driveways. Development of this side could easily exceed that. So they would be bound to form some kind of on-site stormwater detention. That, in a nutshell, is basically not releasing water at any greater rate than it was in the undeveloped condition, or technically within 3 cubic feet per second of that rate. So basically mimic existing conditions and retain that water and slowly let it out. So a development like this would certainly trigger that.
Let the water out. Back in the 40s and 50s, this is trivia, okay? Back in the 40s and 50s, that pond was used for baptism. The local churches, as a matter of fact, our church was, that's where I was baptized.
Was,
Yeah, and I don't want to tell you what year, but but it started with a 4. But anyway, but yes, there was the Baptist church on Little Creek, which is now where the park is,
right.
and St. Matthew's Baptist Church on the Mill Pond used that pond as a baptism.
Interesting, very
Yeah.
interesting.
I'm sorry, council member, I think we interrupted you. Did you have anything else for Mr. Bartlett? Bellinger, Councilmember Bellinger?
No, thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry for the interruption.
No, that was, I think it's very appropriate. Anything else for Ms. Helton?
Ms. Helton, just one question. What uses are allowed under heavy industrial in those zoning districts?
So heavy industrial allows for almost all of the same uses that are allowed in our B2 general business district, including retail, restaurant, office, auto-related uses, warehouse storage, wholesale. It also allows for heavy manufacturing and mining, so oil extraction, metal products and manufacturing. Think about those uses that are located off of that section of University Drive, where you have the chicken plant. So those really kind of big campus facilities that generate a lot of noise and vibration and things of that nature, things that aren't necessarily appropriate in close proximity to residential uses.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other, sure.
That wasn't the pond I was referring to, and I maybe misspoke, but we used to have a professor from Stephen F. Austin come over. He was over, I don't remember the correct terminology, but insects. And he would come and go up to the pond. He took Frank with him, and there was plants that he would go, that he said was like indigenous to that pond. You couldn't find any place else. And so that was I just knew it was up there, but maybe it's not there anymore. But the picture you have of south is not where this water
Okay.
was. It would have been to the west. Up
Okay,
the-
would that be
on
Mill
the-
Pond, you think?
No. There's, from where this property is, if you go up the incline, there is a pond up there on the incline.
And that's
Okay.
what
Nope.
Dr. Godwin would come over and see us, and he would go visit
Right.
whatever it was at this pond. So that's
Okay.
what it was. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
It's one of the other things my name is Frank Leonard, by the
Oh.
way. One of the things I wanted to bring up, where you see that red building right there in the picture, off to the left of it is a city water well. The city is kind of holding in reserve. I tried to get it from the city and they wouldn't let me have it. But anyway, it's a water source for the city. I was just bringing that up. I don't think anybody's mentioned that. It's surrounded by a fence. They're not maintaining it's got a lot of bushes in it. But they wouldn't let me have it. They wanted to keep it. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Could we get the city engineer to verify that? Because I don't recall that.
Mr. Bartlett?
That's the site of water well number 1, which predates the 40s. It is not active. It's been capped and plugged. And so, but we have to maintain those sites so that those old shafts, don't get in the middle of a development. So that's the reason. But it's not a water source. And at this point, we couldn't turn it into a water source for any economical way. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Kim?
So, can I speak right now?
Just a second, please.
Okay, sure.
I want to say, maybe in the last couple of years, we had city people come out to the property. They said that well was so much better than the one up the hill that they thought about reactivating it again. That the reason it closed down is they dropped a piece of equipment down well, and it was too expensive to remove it. And then, you know, for a while, we had all kinds of city people on the property, and they were saying they were thinking about maybe reactivating it.
Okay.
So,
All right. And Mr. Bartlett would be in charge of that, so feel free to connect with him maybe after the meeting.
Okay.
And that's his area of expertise.
Thank
So
you.
thank you. Okay, Councilmember Bellinger.
I would just ask Ms. Helton, I'm glad you came to the podium, because if you would investigate the pond up above, which is not obviously this particular property, and see if it does have particular significance for, you know, for plants or animals, so that we can identify it and think about it in the future land use. I'd appreciate it.
Sure, and I did just want to highlight, so, you know, that circle that you see that's shown as a freshwater pond is actually located in that conservation and preservation lot that we mentioned earlier, as well as property immediately to the north. So this yellow area kind of highlights that lot. So that lot was dedicated in perpetuity to be preserved in its natural state in order to maintain wildlife habitat, erosion control. So just wanted to kind of reiterate that area is, you know, just west to the property where you're seeing the illustration of the small pond, and the floodplain to the north will be maintained in that current state. But yes, we will note that and take a look and see if there's any environmental benefits or things that could be incorporated into that future land use plan amendment that we're working on, or the comprehensive plan update.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Okay, anything else? All right, do I have a motion?
I make a motion that we approve the zone change from I-2 to heavy industrial to R4
All right.
per the item agenda 6B.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Any further discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Mm.
Those opposed, same sign. All right, that carries.
Thank you, Ms. Helton.
Okay, we will move to C, consider approval of Main Street beautification grant as proposed by the Main Street Advisory Board and Main Street Manager, Community Service Assistant Director. Hello there.
Mayor, Council, Jessica Sal, Community Services Assistant Director. I'm here today to ask y'all to consider the approval of the Main Street Beautification Grant. This was proposed by the Main Street Advisory Board with assistance from city staff. Our Main Street Advisory Board is very active. They're very excited. Most of them are newly appointed. They've all been very engaged in our NAC Together master planning process, but wanted to find a project that they could do right now and not wait on the master plan. They want to be involved in that, you know, the whole time, but figure out something they can do right now. So the proposal of the Main Street Board was to kind of revive an old grant program that went away years and years ago. And this is essentially a Main Street beautification grant to our downtown building owners and business owners. So what they proposed was dedicating $10,000 this year. These monies come from our Wine Swirl fundraiser. It's our biggest fundraiser for the Main Street Department. You know, everyone that comes downtown and shops during Wine Swirl, and our wine vendors and all of our ticket sales go towards Main Street projects, whether it's holiday lighting downtown, putting up new signage, and now this proposed project. So the board recommended $10,000 for this first round of grants. The grants would cover 100% of a project up to $1,500. It is on a first come, first served basis. So our goal, if approved, is to open this grant application October 3rd. That gives us about a month to advertise, which should be adequate since we're advertising to a very small group of people. The only people eligible for this grant would be within our downtown historic district. Since it is a Main Street grant program, it has to go with our Main Street focus and what our purview is. And so we'd advertise for about a month to all of our building owners and business owners, because it could be either. Ask them to apply for these grants. It could cover anything from painting to awning repair to signage, cleaning of the structures, and doing any improvements to the front or the back of their buildings. The goal is to have a vibrant downtown that's beautiful and welcoming, and helping some of our small business owners with these small grants. This would all be on reimbursement, so the applicant would be responsible for doing the project, turning in the receipts, and then getting that money dispersed from the city, very similar to how we already do our historic restoration grants. This comes with the full recommendation and voting approval of our Main Street Board. They voted on this in July, and are very excited about this project. And so we are asking you to consider this grant application, or this grant project.
It looks like there's a conflict in the minutes. Is it $2,000 per grant, or is it the 1,500? Looks like they agreed to split the difference, but then at the bottom it says they approved 2,000 per grant.
That is a mistake. It is supposed to be $1,500 per grant. So, yes, I'm sorry about that.
Any public comment? Okay, any council comment?
Is there a matching for that? The $1,500 per request, right?
It's $1,500 essentially per building.
Per
So
bu-
you could have a person that
Right, yeah,
owns
okay.
3 downtown buildings that apply for 3
Oh,
different
okay,
projects.
okay.
So the grants go with the building it's in.
With the buildings, okay,
Yes.
not the person, but the building.
Correct, because we do have several people that own multiple downtown businesses or multiple downtown buildings, and so if they want to improve 3 of their buildings, whether it's new signage or cleaning, we'd like them to be able to do that.
So, they don't have to match any of this funds?
No, if their project is a $1,500 project and they applied for 100% of it, they get all $1,500. If it's a $10,000 project, we can give them $1,500, and then they pay for the rest of it.
Thank you.
Sir?
Okay, any other comments?
So you said it was, it would be granted on a first come, first served basis.
Yes.
Are there any stipulations? Will the board, the Main Street Board, decide who gets those, not just solely on who comes in first?
Yes, some of that will fall back to staff. Some will be on the advisory board because I have a feeling there will be some applications that the applicant submits and there's not, building drawings, or the owner didn't sign off on the work, or it wasn't approved by our Historic Landmark Preservation Committee. So there will be a few applications, I assume, if it's anything like our other grants, that a few of those are ineligible because they didn't meet the requirements. And so once those are kind of kicked to the side, then it's who submitted first and what we can actually do. The Main Street Board also mentioned, because last year our Wine Swirl event was record-breaking numbers, and we had a lot of profit off of it, which is wonderful. They had asked, well, if we want to do, instead of 10 grants, can we do 12? And I'm like, yes, we can request that. Of course, it would come back to y'all to designate additional monies for it. But we're really not sure with this first year, if we're going to have a ton of people that apply, or if we're going to have 2 and I have to go bang on doors saying, like, I will give you money, please just give me an application. So there is some purview on staff side as far as what applications make it to the Main Street Board, and then the Main Street Board will consider all those that fully filled out the application.
These funds are fully coming from your fundraiser.
Yes.
We're just allocating those funds to this purpose.
Exactly. I don't have any authority to give people city money. And so what we're asking y'all for is essentially what we do with our historic landmark, or our historic restoration grants, is giving the Main Street Board the authority to dispense some of these monies in this framework from money that we raised here in Wine Swirl.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comment or questions? Okay, do I have a motion?
Make a motion, we approve the Main Street beautification grant as proposed by the Main Street Advisory Board and the Main Street Manager
Can you put an amount on that so it's clear,
in the amount of $10,000,
but per grant?
$1,500 per grant.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move on to 6D, presentation of proposed 2022-2023 budget and calculated property tax rates. Director of Finance. Hello.
Mayor, Council, Pam Kerbo, Director of Finance. Tonight, we're going to go over the proposed budget one more time. We had some changes, of course, since the last time we met. We sent in the ordinances to the appraisal district. If you recall, at the last meeting, we adopted an additional exemption for the over 65 and disabled persons within the city, and that decreased the assessed value, or the taxable value that is used for our rates. And so all the rates were recalculated, and so tonight I'm going to show you the new calculated rates after that additional exemption was added. The taxable assessed value is a little over $2.1 billion. This includes $46 million in new property added to the roll this year. The prior year, which is the 21-22 tax rate, is currently 61.6 cents. The no new revenue rate would be 55.479 cents, and the voter approval rate would be 61.572 cents. The budget before you tonight proposes a tax rate of 57.213 cents. Of that, it generates 10.4 million in O&M and 1.6 million in debt. That generates an additional 554,000 in new revenue from last year's budget, and of that, 264,000 is from that $46 million worth of new value added to the roll. So looking at that on the same average home value as we did on the 2nd of August, the proposed tax rate of 57.213 would generate a tax liability of $680. The no new revenue rate would generate a tax liability of $659.39, which is a $20.61 increase in the annual tax liability for an average home value in the city of Nacogdoches. Now, these slides are all going to be the same that we discussed last time, with the exception of one item was added. The police department has been notified by the district attorney that they have some pretty significant requirements now on providing data, 911 data, and of the such if there is a criminal case before them. And so it is going to generate a lot of additional workload. And so one of the positions that they had requested in the evidence area was originally a tier 2, and we have had to move that to tier 1 due to the fact that the district attorney has let us know that we definitely are going to have to start complying with that order. So that was added. It was about $55,000 total all-in increase on the police department budget, and so that's the difference you're going to see in the general fund. Other than that, there are no other changes since the last time that we spoke on the general fund.
Councilmember Bellinger, did you have a comment?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. I'm not sure if you want me to save the questions till the end,
Okay.
or if you want me to ask them slide by slide. I'm totally happy to come back to the slides.
Ms. Carbo says either way, whatever you prefer.
Well, do you want to just take it here on this slide? I have.
Sure.
Okay. So I have one question about I know we've had several iterations of these budgets, and I know that's been a lot of work for you, and I appreciate all the hard work you put in. But I saw our revenues are 48 million, and that of course includes the certificates of obligation, 48,538,963, and our expenses are 51,877,685. So I'm trying to figure out where the extra 3,338,000 shows up in the revenues. Or is that possibly the interfund transfers? I'm thinking that may be the reserves.
No. Where are you seeing 51 million so that we're on the same page?
In the detailed budget that you provided, it's page 2 of the detailed budget. Those are the expenses we're going to have.
Okay, but you just added them up. You're not, because I was looking for 51 million. Yeah, okay. So the operating expenses,
they're in your budget.
yeah, but the operating expenses is what you have to compare to your operating revenues, because those like the 21,554,000, those are capital improvement budgets. The 1.8 million, that is capital equipment. Those come from reserves. They're not part of the operating budget. So honestly, the first two sections up there, that's your operating budget. So it shows your operating revenue of 28,451,000 and your operating expenditures of 28,451,000 in the first column.
So you're saying all of the $3 million are all capital?
That's capital. Those are all reserve purchases, yes.
So, but all of those will come out of our reserves, our savings?
That's all reserves, yes.
All of it comes out of our savings?
Yes.
So, okay. Can you explain to me the interfund transfers of 20%? I know they came up a few meetings back, I think we had a fellow from, was it Dallas, who was saying that that was pretty high. What is included in the interfund transfers?
The interfund transfers on the revenue side are the operating transfers from utility and sanitation fund. So for instance, the finance department budget, let's just say the finance department budget is $200,000. I don't work just for the the general fund. I do work for the utility fund, the sanitation fund, and so a portion of my total budget is allocated to the utility and sanitation. And so there's operating transfers to cover those general fund departments that do work for both the utility and the sanitation fund. So that's part of it. The second part of that is a franchise fee. Just like the electric companies and the gas companies have to pay a franchise fee into the city, we as the water company and the sewer company have to pay a franchise fee to ourselves. And so that's the other part of that interfund transfer. So it's operating transfers as well as the franchise fees.
Okay, and that doesn't include any reserves or anything that are,
No,
Is that
those are completely operating revenues.
okay? Thank you.
Uh-huh.
You good to go ahead, or do you have anything else?
Not on this page.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
So, here again, the operational expenditures by function, this did not change as far as percentage-wise. It does include that additional position that was added for about $55,000. And so this, of course, again, just shows that, the majority of our, operational expenditures by function, are in the public safety department as well as general government, which would be finance, city manager, city secretary, IT, those types of departments. And then looking at those same expenditures by classification, you'll see that 78% of our general fund operating expenditures are personnel cost, and that's salaries and all benefits. That's all in cost. And so that again was changed from the last time by that one position that was added.
So I do have a question,
Uh-huh.
and that's, so, first of all, where would the $300,000 that we approved last year, I know it's not on this budget, but where would that have shown up in the budget, that one-time inflation adjustment? Where would that have shown up?
That
in
would have
this?
been reserves. We paid for that out of reserves.
But I know, but where in the, would that have been in the
That would not have
operating?
been in the operating budget.
That would have been.
That
in
would have
which
been
fund
part
would
of
you-
your, a capital project type, a reserve fund. So like on this
would
year's,
you-
go ahead.
Uh-huh, go ahead.
No, so like on this year's, we have the $823,000 for the retention payment. If this was last year, that's where we would have put that. Now, we did it mid-year, so it wasn't in the budget. We did a budget amendment. But had we done this at this point last year, that would have been the same thing. It would have been a line item for an inflation amount for the $300,000 down
So
there in that capital.
we're not including that one-time expense again this year. correct?
No, it was one time, and this 823 is the same way. Those payments will only be made this fiscal year, and then they cease in the next fiscal year. We're not rolling it into their salaries. It is a one-time separate payment that will be paid quarterly, but it is not part of their base salary, and so as of 9/30/23, it ceases.
So, let me follow up on that. I think, I listened to Mr. Mahar's, question about that, and it seems to me that that one time was not one time, because now we have it again this year. It may be under a different kind of class, it's not inflation adjustment this time, it's termed something else, but we have it again. And I don't see how we cannot include what we give employees this year quarterly into their, particularly since we're calling it a stopgap, into the following years. This is, to me, an operational expenditure, the $823,000, and should be showing up as personnel services. It's a personnel expense. I think it has to be included as a personnel expense, and I've received several comments about that. It has to be, it's part of our budget as what we're giving employees.
We can certainly do that, understanding though that then it becomes part of their base salary, and we have that every year ongoing. The intent for this year was for it to truly be a stopgap between this year and when hopefully the inflation is over. It is a one-time payment. It is not something that we are prepared to go forward with at this point. But now, if that is something that you want to do, then we can go back through and recalculate the tax rates, including that. I'm not sure that we might have the ability to do that within the voter approval rate. I would just have to look at it.
Well, let me ask you this. Are you expecting inflation to go down?
Well, I'm
Are
not,
you
I'm
expecting
not
that
gonna
it
even
will
attempt to tell you what's gonna happen with that.
Not even go down, but you're expecting to go
Well, I mean,
lower.
I think
So are we gonna
it's not
have
necessarily
minus
inflation.
1%?
It's not necessarily inflation that we're looking at this time. This truly is a retention payment. We are seeing people in every department looking for other jobs. Inflation, of course, is a problem. Fuel has been a problem. Fuel, we are seeing that finally go down a little bit. The intent of this, though, was as a retention payment. It is, yes, inflation is tied to it. The entire economy is tied to it. But this is truly something to keep the employees that we have had long tenured, hopefully that we do not lose them, and as the way we've started seeing some of our departments losing employees.
So, let me ask a couple, so if inflation isn't gonna, I mean, we're talking about inflation going backwards in order to not incur that expense, again, the following year. That's my understanding. So we are going to have to do something, or particularly, so that 823,000 is an ongoing expense. It will have to be a part of the whole budget. Let me also, you talked about certain people, we see our police force, we're losing, we have real serious issues with retention with the police force. And I guess I'll talk about that at the end, but we really have to target that. I already said that at the last meeting. Let me ask one other question. Where is the $350,000 for the insurance adjustment? Where do I see that on this budget?
Y'all asked me to remove that because y'all wanted to look at that if we needed it mid-year. And so
Okay,
that was
that's fine.
removed. Mhm.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to be sure. But that is, I guess I've made my point on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So do we have well, let's go to capital on general fund. There were no changes here as well. This is the same capital expenditures that were reflected on the August the 2nd meeting as well. Do we have any, go ahead.
And I just wanted to reflect here that the $823,000 that we see there is called equipment. It just is not
Well, it's under
true.
projects. It's equipment or
Right.
projects, and that is something that we are proposing as a one-time thing.
Right, but I'm just saying it's not true. Thanks.
So do we have any other questions on the general fund? Before we
Oh,
jump to
one more,
utility?
sorry. One more. Well, if we, I was asked this question, if we approve a tax rate now, does that mean that we've approved the bond projects on this page?
What we're asking you to do tonight in the next item on the agenda is to propose a tax rate. It is the maximum tax rate that can be set this year. So if you decide to reduce the amount of the COs or not do the COs, then those 6 cents or 6.5 cents of debt would come out. And what you do tonight would be fine because we can adopt a rate lower than what we do tonight. We just cannot adopt a rate higher than what we do tonight.
Thank
That
you
makes
so
sense.
much for clarifying that.
Right,
I just
right.
wanted to be sure.
Yep. So are we good to go to utility fund, or do we have other things that we want to talk about on the general fund?
I'll save mine until the end.
Okay, all right. So utility fund, no changes on operational revenues in utility fund. This is the same that we looked at on August the 2nd. Same on the operating expenditures by classification. Here, no changes. The capital equipment, there was one change here. I had neglected to move the ARPA monies that we have received, the first tranche. We received that, and it was allocated to our special grant fund, because in the beginning, we weren't sure exactly how we were going to utilize that money. And during the CIP process back in April, y'all gave us direction to spend that first tranche of ARPA monies on sewer projects. And so I had to move that from the special grant fund to the utility fund, and so that money is reflected here at 3.8 million. That is the remaining money after the we pull out the contract for the grant administrator, and so that is a new item on this particular spreadsheet. That's the only change in the utility fund, by the way. Any more questions before we jump to sanitation? Okay, sanitation, there was no changes at all on sanitation. This is the same revenues that were presented with the original budget and the same expenditures. So same capital, everything here is identical to the original budget on August the 2nd. Once again, we did not increase premiums for dependent coverage for our employees. We did have to increase the city-paid premium to the self-insurance plan from $660 per employee per month to $725 per employee per month. The operating budget does not include a COLA for employees this year. There were additional employees added in the City Secretary Finance Department, the Police Evidence Department, Animal Control, Sanitation Disposal, Utility Billing, and a reclassification to full-time in the Parks Department. And of course, as we've hounded on y'all, we have a very significant increase in our electricity and fuel budget. We did make some changes before the August the 2nd. We had budgeted fuel at the levels that we were seeing fuel in June and July. And so once we started seeing that come down a little bit, we did some research into what they anticipated fuel to be for next year. And so we were able to reduce the fuel a little bit, but that was reflected in your first August the 2nd budget. So still a significant increase, but not as bad as we had originally thought it was going to be. So before we get to the calendar, I would open it up for more questions. I think you said you had some.
I have several, and
Okay.
forgive any ignorance
you're
there
good.
may be. On operating revenues, get to the right page here,
Which fund are we talking?
general fund.
Okay.
So I see your proposed amount for sales tax. I know this is a complicated number. How do you come up with 7.665 million?
Okay, so the 7.6 is the actual sales tax. That is the sales tax portion of like mixed beverage tax, and so that's a little bit different. But just the sales tax, that when you think of sales tax, 7.6 is the amount that we budgeted this year. I have back to 1990 history on all of our sales tax. And so basically just what I have been able to do is just go back and look at kind of what our history has been. Now, of course, COVID kind of threw things, I mean, not COVID, the original 2020 COVID, threw things in a spin. We thought it was going to. It really didn't. Now the inflation has got us where we know our numbers are somewhat inflated. So we know we're going to see some decreases. How significantly those are going to decrease, we don't really know. I will tell you, we have never had year-over-year decrease in total sales tax, ever. Could happen, but we were very conservative in budgeting this year, and so we only budgeted $7 million this year. We will probably end the year at about probably $8.1 million. Now, do I think we're going to get $8.1 million next year? Nope. I think we're going to start at some point. We're going to see that correct itself. Whatever's going on may or may not. I definitely do not want to hang my hat on an $8 million budget, though. I think Mario and I both kind of batted back and forth. We had it at $7.5 million, and I was like, we've never gone down. We've never gone down that significantly. I think we can do 7.6. He's like, are you sure? I know I'm not sure, but I don't think it's anywhere close to 8. And so it is, at the end of the day, it's always a guessing game, but it's based on somewhat of a history of us not being able to see significant drops. Now, could we lose an entire month's worth of sales tax next year? Yeah, we could. History tells us we're not going to, but Yeah, it's always possible. Those are those things, though, that as we go through quarterly, when we present the quarterly update to y'all, if we see double-digit decreases in sales tax the first quarter or the first and second quarter, at that point, we're gonna come back to y'all and say, there's no way we're gonna make budget. And so here are the things that we need to look at, reducing services, reducing something in order to make sure that we don't end upside down for next year. And so that's what's really important about those quarterly reports, is to make sure that we are, recovering the revenues at the level that we anticipated, so that we have time to make some adjustments before the end of the fiscal year.
So back in the housing bubble, 2008, 2010, that range, did we see, I'm thinking financial
The thing-
downfalls?
Yeah, no, and the thing is, and it's odd, but the thing with Nacogdoches is we never see the big spikes or the big drops that everybody else in the state. We are pretty isolated. And I think it became very obvious during the first part of the pandemic that our tax base is, we have, and we know we do have a lower income tax base. People spend what they have. And we do not have people that have a whole lot. And so you have a few of those, but we have, for the most part, our populace has the same amount of money to spend ongoing. And so even when things are bad, they're still having to buy the bare necessities, and those are the things that they've always bought. And so we don't have these big drops, but we also don't have the big spikes either, because we don't have a lot of folks that come into a lot of extra money on the regular. We all are pretty much, live paycheck to paycheck. I mean, that's the way that our entire organization is set up here for some reason. It's very odd, but I've talked to several other finance directors at our meetings and stuff, and they were saying it's just because we are very isolated. We don't lose a lot to, shopping to Houston or Dallas. Unless people want to go that far, they're just gonna stay right within this area. And so during the pandemic, we saw that people were staying here to shop. We didn't see the big decreases in revenues. People didn't go to Tyler. They didn't go to Lufkin because they were scared to leave their home and get out and around people. And so that's why we didn't see those big drops. But you're never going to see any big, huge gains either. That's why we're thinking that the majority of this is prices are elevated, which means sales tax are elevated. So at some point when prices do drop, we're going to see some drops on that. That's why we did not budget this anywhere close to the $8 million, because we do anticipate at some point it's going to correct a little bit. Now, I don't think we'll see double-digit decreases every month like we've seen double-digit increases every month, but it's always possible. So we kind of insulate ourselves for that by budgeting as conservatively as we can.
Can you talk to me just a minute about the equipment replacement fund?
Mm-hmm.
I know I saw something in I believe it's in the capital expenditures
Yes,
that
okay.
we're talking about
Sure.
transferring money.
Yeah. So on page, let's see.
It's
You
page
can
7 where that
It's on page
transfer-
2 and page 7. So we started an equipment replacement fund back in probably the early 2000s because the general fund, of course, is not set up like the utility. We don't have depreciation. We don't have those sinking funds. So when you spend money to buy a fire truck, there's no money going back in to help replace the next one. Like in the utility fund, we would depreciate it and we build that money up and buy a new.
And that becomes reserves.
So in the general fund, we didn't have that capability. So for years and years, we would pay for reserves to buy a fire truck, but there was no way when it got old, there was no money sitting there available to replace it. And so we set up this separate equipment replacement fund. And so now what we do is, when we started it, we funded it with, I think, $1 million way back then of reserves, started it, and then we buy, like, the parks department if they need a new truck. So we would buy the truck out of the equipment replacement, cash money, $20,000. And then the parks operating budget will pay a car note over a 5-year or 10-year, whatever the normal life, depending on if it's a tractor or a car, would pay that car note back into the equipment replacement fund. So just like this year, we've got a parks truck that's out there. It's $25,000. The parks operating budget is going to pay $5,000 in car notes back there, so that in 5 years, there's money there to replace that vehicle. Otherwise, you have no money to replace the vehicles. And that's what got us into a trouble back in the 90s, is we had no money to replace these vehicles that we had bought when we actually had some reserves, and then years we didn't have reserves, we couldn't buy vehicles because we had no ability to do that. And so that has worked really well with us. That's how we replace all of our police vehicles, the $400,000 every year. We have them on a 2-year rotation. We have all of Parks and Cemeteries vehicles on there now. We have their mowers. We have a couple of fire engines there now. It's not all of general funds equipment, but it's a major part of it. What we're actually wanting to do with this $100,000 that's on page 7 and again on page 2 is to set up the same type of thing, same type of equipment replacement, but for maintenance items like air conditionings. We have had significant cost for replacing air conditioning units that are not budgeted, and so ours has been messed up several times, almost every summer. And so, we have a $4,000 bill that we weren't anticipating. And so those are operating things that, that literally kill our budget. I mean, it's like, what do we do now? Because we don't have $4,000, but we have to replace that air conditioning unit. And we have some air conditioning units that are $20,000 and $25,000. And so the intent here is to start that equipment replacement like we did with the $1 million years ago for the vehicles, but to start that for any of these major equipment repairs is for, air conditioners is the one that we see the most, but have that ability to do that and then charge those departments that actually have a replacement during the year to refund that money and build it back up for the next step. So that's what we're wanting to do there, is to set up a separate equipment replacement fund to do those major maintenance items that pop up during the year, emergency-wise, that we don't have funds for.
And those are really just set aside funds in the general, they are
That's
still general fund dollars.
Yes, yes.
They're just set aside for another
Yes,
purpose.
yes.
But are they not reserves? Does that not
Yes,
come from our reserves?
it's general fund reserves that we're using to start this equipment fund. And this can only be general fund department. So the utility billing department can't use, their air conditioner goes out, it's on them. This is just general fund money, so just general fund departments can use that.
Okay. I think I want to move on to somebody else while I figure out my next one.
I just have one quick question, or maybe more of a comment on the general fund proposed revenues. At this point, we are riding a little higher than normal on sales tax.
Yes.
And is that due to influx of funds from like government agencies, or whatever, to citizens? Or
Well, I think in 2020 that we saw that. I think that's why we didn't see the decreases in sales tax that a lot of people did, because my philosophy on this is completely my opinion, is that we have people that are living at a very low income level, and during that first part of the pandemic, when the federal government was giving those additional $600 payments or whatever, those folks were spending that money, not saving that money. And so they needed an air conditioner, they needed new tires, they needed to put a door on their house. That's why we saw such a big increase in building supply stores and auto supply stores during that time, because they had additional money to spend and they were actually spending it. And so, yeah, during that time, I think a lot of, not necessarily an increase, but it kept us from losing, was the fact that those folks, those federal monies that were coming in were being spent back in 2020.
and you based the budget, the sales tax budget, on a level often of what the spike, it's not a spike now, it's just running slightly higher than normal, correct?
Right now, we're running high. I mean, I think we're going to pick up over $1 million in revenue this year from our very conservative budget last year, because the year before I think we had like let's see, what do we have? Almost $7.5 million in 2021. That was during the COVID year, and so we felt like at some point we were going to see a decrease after COVID. So that's why we only budgeted $7 million. But that's not what has happened, and so that's why we're seeing some pretty significant increases. So basically, what we're budgeting for 22-23 is just a little bit higher than what 20 and 21 actually was.
Was it 8 million?
What we end this year, we have one more month coming in, And if it comes in, even if it comes in flat, we'll hit about 8.1. If it comes in up, we'll be a little over that.
And we don't hit spikes, up and down spikes. Think it's because of the slow growth that we have in Nacogdoches?
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of things that contributed to that. But yeah, I think we're very consistent, if not anything else. Our spending patterns are pretty consistent. Our, we are very, very different. We're isolated from a lot of cities our size. It's hard for us to compare ourselves to them, because most of cities our size are in metro areas, and we're kind of isolated, and so things happen a little bit different here. And so it does make it kind of hard to guess at how the economy is going to affect us, but we basically just use as much history as we have and cross our fingers a lot.
And the general fund's proposed capital expenditures, that the list is a one-time funding, correct?
So on capital, yes. So
On
are you
capital,
looking at?
Yes, capital projects.
Yeah,
basic.
any of those capital projects, any of those things on page 2, in the second two, or the third and the fourth, basically, I don't want to call them paragraphs, but that's what they are. Those are all one-time expenditures out of reserves, except for column 2, the 20 million, of course, would be from the CO issuance. So the
Right.
first column, the 1.5 million and the 1.6 million, those are all reserves allocation,
One time,
one time.
thank you.
I have a couple more questions.
I've got a comment. I want to go back and visit this self-insurance fund again
Okay.
on page 28 of the budget. So what we've changed this to do is, we're going to start with a projected balance of $1.6 million in our reserves for claims for our employees, and we're not going to fund it to the level that we are going to attempt to end at $1.6 million next year. We're going to fund it at a level that we're going to anticipate ending up at $1.3 million next year,
Right.
$1.287 million.
Right.
So we're just gonna kind of push that on the next council. Yeah, I don't like that. I think we've got
What that
fund
is, okay, so let me back up just a little bit. So what we're funding to, historically, we have tried to fund between expected and maximum, okay? And so, last year, we funded to expected. We didn't get between, we were right at expected. And so when that happens, our exposure is the difference between the expected and the maximum. And so this year, what we've done without that $350,000 transfer, when I pulled that out, that basically gets us to where we are going to, the maximum that we could be out is the 3.9. We know we're gonna fund 3.6 of that. And so even if we had a terrible year, our stop loss is gonna kick in, and we will not go below, well, we might hit right at $1 million, maybe, but probably not. But that's just, you know.
And then that's the next council's problem. To make up what we lost, plus what they've got to deal with.
Yes, if you want to keep the fund balance above $1 million, and that's my preference is to always have fund balance above $1 million. We had a couple of years that, of course, we had some really bad years, and we did not increase premiums, and so we were down to $400,000 and $500,000 for a couple of years. Yeah, $1 million is kind of the bare minimum that I want to see us not drop below that if we could all possibly.
And then my next comment is back to these retention payments. I mean, this is something that we're seeing all around our community. It's nothing that we're doing that's any novel approach. NISD's done it a couple of times. Stephen F. Austin has just announced it. They're about to do the same thing, gonna make one-time payments. It doesn't become a part of your salary. It's your next raise is not calculated off of your salary plus the increase. It's a one-time payment for retention. Now, are we gonna have to probably do something next year? Yeah, I think we probably will. But it gets us to there, and it gets us to the place that we can see what inflation is gonna be, hopefully. I'm very hopeful that we will see a decrease in inflation. I don't think we'll see deflation.
No.
but I think we'll see a decrease in inflation and hopefully get people back to work.
Well, and I think what we're hoping for next year is we understand that 3 months into the next fiscal year, this electric contract expires and our new one starts. And so those increases that we had to build in operationally this year for electricity will not be there next year. And so those funds can be utilized for a COLA or some other type of market adjustments for the employees, where this year we didn't have that ability to do that. And so that was the impetus for the one-time thing. Next year, the electricity going back down is gonna free up some operational money that can be utilized to offer a COLA of 1%, 2%, 3%, whatever y'all determine for the following year, which is normally what we do. This year, we just didn't have the operational money to do that because of the significant increase in the electricity and fuel charges.
So a couple of comments, and then a question. So on the self-insurance fund, our discussion is not about generating revenue from property taxes for this, it's taking it out of reserves, right?
Right.
So if we're talking about it being solvent and not kicking it to the next council, really it should be coming, we should tax for that, right? If that's what we want to do, not take it out of reserves, because we're just taking, I mean, it's, if we do it now or do it later, it's still the same reserves. We're not saying, that was our point back when we discussed it in July, I think, was that if we did need to move funds, that we would do that, right?
Right, that was the thing, because at this point, we may not ever hit our maximum. We may not hit expected. If we have a good year, and we have had a bad year this year before we had a good year. And so if we have a good year, we may only spend $3 million. Well, we're putting 3.6. We could end next year with 1.7 million in reserves if we have a good year. And so that was the reasoning with y'all saying, let's hold off on transferring that money until we know if we need it. If we see 2 or 3 big $500,000 claims like we had this year and see that we may have to dip into reserves, then in the self-insurance fund, then of course those monies could be utilized at that point. But we don't have to necessarily start the year off saying we're gonna send them $350,000. And then what if we had a great year and didn't spend, we only had $2 million worth of claims? Well, then we've got a $2.5 million reserve in the self-insurance fund, and we've used $350,000. So that was kind of the reasoning, I think, when we decided to do it in mid-year if we needed to.
What did we spend, what will we spend this year projected? Will it be near that 3.9?
I think it's pretty close. I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to tell you that. I'd have to send that to you. I'm not real sure. I don't think we'll hit our max this year, but it's gonna be close.
I'm sorry. What, do you have anything else?
I do, but I don't remember what they are yet.
If I
Ms.
could,
Bellinger has one.
Certainly.
if I could speak to the insurance fund, the other issue is not taking it out of reserves, or it's also reanalyzing the insurance fund itself. And if we have to dip into our savings to supplement the insurance, we have to rethink what we're doing with insurance. What, do we need a different provider? Do we have to? So, and this gives us some time to do that. If we need to charge more, if we need to, whatever we need to do, it has to be, we have to have whatever we need to do to have insurance coverage without taking it out of savings. That's really what we have to do. So that's where I'm coming from on that. So I'd like to go back to the to the $823,000. It requires, if for us not to have that expense again next year, not 2022, 23, but 23, 24, that would require deflation, not an increase in inflation. So whatever you want to call it, if we're going to need another $823,000 in stopgap, we will need it. It's not going to come down. We're going to keep needing it every year. So what our annual expenses have to come out of our annual budget, not our savings. So we're taking our savings, and so there are two issues with that. One is we're taking our savings, which were put aside for those capital expenditures, for equipment, for the maintenance on the fire stations. I'm concerned that we don't have any maintenance budget built in. That's our reserves. And so we're taking that money out of that and putting it into something that will be an annual cost. And then the second one is it's not transparent. It doesn't show up as a personnel cost. It is a personnel cost, and it shows up as, what is it, equipment? That's just not, that's just not, it's not.
It will be on the journal ledger as a personnel cost, yes, ma'am. It has to be. We have to run it through our personnel, yes, ma'am. It will be
But on the budget, it doesn't show as.
well, it's a
as
project. It's not equipment. It's a capital project. It's not a capital. It's a reserve project. But as far as the actual journal ledger, yes, it will come out of a personnel account.
Okay, but in our budget, it shows up as not personnel, and in the 70s, whatever percent that are personnel costs.
No, because it's not a
there.
base, it's not part of the base salary, no.
Okay, but it is personnel. So
And so-
those are my two issues with that.
So,
Um,
can I just say something, just so that I want to make sure that we're clear? So,
Yes,
yes, we don't know what's gonna happen with inflation and the economy next year. And yes, we probably will be having to look at something next year. Our intent, though, is that next year we go back to the normal for us, which is a COLA, because we will have those reduced electricity charges. We know we're going to save several $100,000, well, over $1 million, all funds combined. So that frees up some monies to go back to what we normally do, which is the COLAs. And for this amount of money next year, we could do a 3 to 4% COLA across the board if we need to do that next year. And so the reason that we're proposing this year is because this year has been incredibly difficult on the operating side because of the increase in fuel and electricity. Yes, we understand that we're not ever going to go back to where we were, and our employees are always going to need more. But next year, we're hopeful to go back to our normal practice of doing COLAs instead of having to do these one-time payments, because we will free up operating money next year. So that's
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify that.
right. I understand you're hopeful to free up operating money, and we're hopeful for deflation. And
Well, I know
So
we're
maybe-
freeing up the electricity, because the contract starts January of 21, and it's the half
Okay.
of the contract we're under now. So that's
Okay.
done. I know that money will be saved. Now, what happens with everything else, who knows?
Well, great, that'll be helpful when we go and do some other items on this budget. But I did want to ask also about, I noticed we added in the police position, which is great. Does this budget reflect the full police force salaries for how many policemen we should have? Or how many are actually reflected in this budget?
So we still have the 3 frozen positions from last year are still frozen. But all the other positions are budgeted.
Okay, well, I notice we keep losing, I think we've lost 6 police officers since May 1st, and that doesn't include the retired chief. So that's 7 with him. And I know that Chief Weems had talked about a dangerously low police force. What happens, where are the dollars reflected, or what happens to those dollars when the positions aren't filled? Where are they showing up? Where do they go? How are
So we
using the
budget,
dollars?
we budget for their full salary, and if we do not have a person in that position all year, then that portion of their salary is not spent. But
Right.
you're gonna see an increase in overtime, because they still have to have the coverage. And so if we are short 5 officers, that means we have other officers that are pulling extra duties. And so you see, that's why we've seen such an increase in our overtime during the last several years as a result of being short-staffed. And so, yes, you're gonna save salary dollars, but then you have overtime dollars that go up. And so at the end of the day, we do have somewhat of a savings, but it's not like we're, the entire time that we don't have that position filled, we're saving all of that money, because we do have increased costs for making up for those positions being empty, as well as for health insurance. Whether that position is filled or not, we have to make those transfers to self-insurance funds. So even if those positions are vacant, we're still paying that $725 per month into the self-insurance plan for all of the positions, whether they are filled or not.
What portion of the unfilled positions do we have savings or extra money? And then what happens to those dollars?
So depends on how many positions are vacant and how long they're vacant during the year. But at the end of the year, if they had $8 million budget and they only spent $7.9 million, then $100,000 is added to reserves. That's the only way general fund reserves are built, is either one of two ways. We collect more revenues than we had anticipated, or we don't spend all of the operating expenditures that we thought we would. Those are the two things. That's the way we generate reserves in the general fund. And so if we collect more revenues, that's good for reserves. If we don't spend 100% of our operating expenditures, that's also good for reserves. But at the end of the day, most departments come in between 97 and 98% of their budget. So it's not a significant amount that is added to reserves, but it is some, yes.
Are you saying the police department is spending 97% of its budget?
I don't know what theirs for this year is, but it's going to be very close to. They probably will hit their budget because of fuel, so we'll probably go over.
But not in personnel expenses. It's just the fuel.
No, because they
But
do
everybody
have the
else-
vacant positions.
So everybody else, all the other departments will go over their budget because of fuel and because they're mostly filled. Is that correct?
Yes, if they do not compensate in other areas. And so, and our departments do that. And so if they know that they're going to be over in fuel and they have an item in maintenance that doesn't have to be done this year, then they may forego that. Or if it's an optional supply that they don't necessarily need, that they just wanted to try to do this year, sometimes they will reallocate those monies, and those are line item transfers within the department. Fuel this year, we've already done some budget amendments last month for the departments that we know are going to be significantly over, sanitation and police being those two that are on the streets the most. And so we know that we're going to see that. We've already tried to take care of those with some budget amendments along the way. But yes, historically we do not have very many departments that ever go over budget.
So I would like to in the future, it doesn't have to be in this month because I know we have a lot to do, but I would like to see how much of the police department's budget is going to supplement either the reserves or other budgets or whatever, including fuel costs.
So
I
I
have
can do
one
that
other-
at year end.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that'll be helpful. We'll see that.
Yes.
Year end is coming up. So.
It is.
I have another question about reserves. When I first came on as a city council member, we talked about the $1 million in reserves to fix the roof at City Hall. And I've asked about it a number of times, and I have understood that, well, we had a bid, or do we still have that $1 million allocated?
I
for
don't believe
the
it was
roof?
1 million. Hold on.
I could be wrong.
It's 200,000 and it is allocated in the current year budget.
What page?
Okay,
So that's on page 30 of the CIP.
okay, thanks.
It is going
Thanks
to,
for correcting me on that.
it's going to be, in the facilities, the last hall, City Hall roof, 200,000. It's in the green column because that is in the current year budget.
Hey, thank you so much. I was trying to find it.
Yeah, that's it.
Sometimes it's hard to find these things.
City Hall roof, there it is.
Yeah, great. I do care about all our maintenance issues. You can come back to me. I have some other questions, but I'll pass it for right now.
Are you through with your presentation, other than our questions?
And we'll go over the calendar, I
I thought
guess.
maybe we might do public comment. Any one in the audience want to speak? Okay.
Well, I have one other question
Let me-
on this.
Okay.
So I know that I may not have been on the correct page, but when I was looking at the budget, it looked to me like our reserves are being depleted by $3 to $4 million, and that next year we'll have less than $3 million in reserves. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So you're speaking
And
of
I mean
general fund.
over-
Which page?
And I mean over 25%. I didn't mean, I'm
No,
not
yeah,
over.
I got you.
Can I interrupt
So
you for
page
just a second?
2 on the general fund, I'm sorry.
we've been showing this PowerPoint, we're going through this document. Is there any way we could show the page that we're on the TVs in the room? I'm sorry to ask that, but I know it's hard for everyone to follow in the room.
I think it's page 2 of the budget.
Yeah. It's on the website, yeah. Okay, so, I'm sorry, what was the question? I got sidetracked.
I'm sorry, that's my fault.
No, that's okay. I'm sorry, Kathleen, can you ask me that again? I forgot what
I
we were
think
talking
it's
about.
on page 2, but I'm not sure which, it looks
Oh, the
like,
reserves, yes, okay, I got you. Okay, so, in the third paragraph, which is the capital improvement projects from reserve funds, that $1.5 million is all the CIP projects that are budgeted out of reserves. And then the bottom 1.6 million is the other capital equipment or projects that are budgeted out of reserves. So yes, you're correct. What we are asking this year is to spend about $3 million out of reserves. We normally spend 1.5 to 2. Last year we did not spend or the year before because of COVID, we did not request a lot of capital, and so we are having to make up a little bit on the equipment side this year. But yes, that takes our reserves to about 2.5 million over our required 25% of 7 million that we have to keep just for emergency purposes. The 7 million we do not spend, so that gives us about 2.5 over. Yep.
So and that, I'm not actually on that page. I was on a different page, but because I was looking at the, here, let me pull all this out. Sorry, it's hard to do one-armed COVID. I was looking on page 2 at the bottom. Where is it?
Yes, the 2.5 million excess over reserves.
No, at the full budget, the full budget was 40. I'm sorry, I need my glasses. I can't see this. Oh, here it is. So the total allocated funds looks like it's where is it? I'm sorry.
You're looking at the total allocated funds of 41 million. That includes the cash. So that's not the amount of the budget. That's the amount of, we start with $12 million cash. We bring in revenues of 28, gives us available funds of 41 million, okay? Then we're gonna spend 28 in operating, and then the 3 million in reserves leaves us an ending cash balance of 9.6, which those added up is the total allocation with the cash and the expenditures of 41 million. And so that doesn't mean we're spending 41 million. That's what we have allocated available. That's cash on hand, plus our new revenues and our expenditures. So at the end of the day, we will have 2.5 million available over our $7 million reserve that we keep. And that's probably a pretty normal reserve for us. We've built it up over the last couple of years because of the influx of CARES money, and then the year of COVID, we put a skid really on any unnecessary spending, and so we added a lot to reserves that year because we did not spend a lot of our operational money that year. So 2.5 million over the reserve requirement is probably pretty normal for us. Right now, we're at like 5 million over reserves, which is very unnormal for us.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I need to search around for where my question was. So if you come back to me, but
Okay.
but yeah.
Mr. Huckabee?
So I'm going through this sheet, page 2 in particular, just summarizing. 78% of our general fund expenditures are personnel.
Right.
And then we have another portion that's electricity and fuel and those sorts of things. How much of our general fund operating budget is discretionary? Do you have, what could is there anything that can be cut? That's just a pure question.
PowerPoint or no? Okay. Okay, so let's look, so here we go. So, depends on what you want to say is discretionary. Of course, personnel is here. At any point, personnel can be reduced, and so that is definitely something that, you know, depending on your view, whether that can be reduced or not. The contractual services, that is gonna be stuff we are under contract. That's fuel, that is, or not fuel, that's, well, fuel's there too, but, electricity, I'm sorry. Any of our maintenance contracts for software, for hardware, for, any of our equipment, all of those things, we're under contract for those. And so those two large pieces, we really can't do anything unless we decide to cut services and cut employees, and that's always an option, but that's just on the surface. If we're gonna leave services the way they are, that's not discretionary. So that leaves you with supplies and materials and maintenance, which is 8% of your budget. And the supplies and materials includes fuel. And so, you know, we can have a police force, but if we can't put them on the street with fuel, that part is not discretionary either. So you're looking at a very, very, very small portion of the general fund that we actually can play
Manipulate.
with. And the thing is years ago, we went through this entire process and tried to get our operating budgets as lean as possible. Because we had some areas that we had some monies that were budgeted every year and never spent. And so over time, though, as budgets have gotten tight, we have asked departments, you have to take a hard look, and if you don't need it, it has to come out. And so we are at a bare bones budget when you're saying now, as far as operating, we can continue operating at the level we're at with this budget, but to find 200,000 or 500,000 or 900,000 in this budget, it has to be found in personnel, because there's where all the money is, unfortunately. I mean, that's just where it is.
And the other piece, the 9%, that's less than $3 million.
Yeah, so
I mean,
there's not a
at
whole lot,
most.
yeah. And then, like I said, and a portion of that you have to have anyway. It's not discretionary to have fuel if you're gonna have employees out working. They have to be able to get to their work site. So there's even portions of that 3 million that are not discretionary.
On the additional employees that we have in personnel services this year, how much additional expenditure do we expect from that?
Can I get on here?
I'm sorry, I'm asking really
you're
deep
good.
questions.
Am I doing? Okay. One more. Don't like that. All right, here we go. Okay, so in the general fund, the highlighted, items here are in the annual recurring cost, the operational section. These are the items that were added to the existing budget. And so if you'll see over there, the tier one, that's $440,000. That includes the assignment pay for police and fire, as well as the CDL pay for all departments, and then the office assistant 3, the part-time, making the part-time city gardener full-time, a part-time adoption coordinator at the animal shelter, and the evidence supervisor in police. And so that 440 encompasses the new positions as well as those assignment pays.
So if there was something that was discretionary in personnel, it's people that have not been hired yet, right?
Right,
I mean,
right.
we don't want to cut
Right,
the employees we have now.
exactly.
Have you sent this to us? This is updated from when we met in July, correct?
Yes, this is updated because I had to update the evidence supervisor in police.
Would you mind sending that
No,
out
not at all.
and maybe post it on the website
Yep.
also?
Absolutely.
Mr. Bowling, you've been quiet.
Yeah,
Any
well,
questions?
you know, discretionary. Generally in private industry, they have what they call layoffs. We don't want to look in that direction for city employees. One of the things on the insurance group plan, I said group plan, but is that basically what it is?
Yeah, we're partially self-funded, so.
Self-funded?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So we do have some caps, so we do have some level of ability to cap our, per se, our losses. So, you know, there's no chance that next year we go bankrupt. No chance.
Okay.
Now, if you have 2 or 3 years that we hit reserves to 200,000 or 300,000, yes, we could get there over time. But we have those stop loss measures in place where could drop right at $1 million, but we're not gonna drop any lower than that next year, even if we have a terrible, terrible year, because we do have those stop loss measures in place.
And the 725 is based on whether you have 250 or 300 employees?
The 725, that is what we had to calculate. Currently, we do 660, and that generates, I don't know, it was 2.5 million, let's say. We knew we needed 2.8 million from employee contributions.
Okay,
And so
right.
we just divided that over
Divided that,
320
300.
something, yeah,
Okay.
employees, and that's how we came up with the
325?
775.
Okay, thank you.
Can I jump in with a quick question? I'm gonna steal a little bit of knowledge from our immediate DebtCog past president. Thinking about insurance, I attended the most recent DebtCog meeting, my first, and it was a very informative group, and Mr. Bolden was recognized as the immediate past president, and thank him for his service to our region for that and for our city. It's a big deal. DebtCog's health insurance plan was significantly better than ours, and I believe they contract with the Texas Association of Counties. Does TML have a comparable plan? I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that. Would that be more cost effective than what we do now? I don't know the answer to that.
So TML does, and years and years and years ago, we were on TML insurance. We did bids this year, and TML did not respond. Is that right? They did not respond. And so I don't know what their current situation is because they did not respond to the bid. But years and years and years ago, we were on that. When I very first started with the city, decades ago, we were on TML insurance, and we changed not long after I came because their rates were extremely high back then. Now that's been 25 years ago, so you know who knows what's going on now. But like I said, they chose for whatever reason not to bid on our insurance this go around.
TML, I mean, DebtCog is basically funded by government, and it's how much business we do for the community based on the funding that goes for operational funds for DebtCog. And I'm not sure if they can afford it.
Yeah.
They can afford the rates
Yeah.
because they don't have to go out and raise revenue. The government comes to them.
Right. I think she raised her hand. Maybe.
Councilmember Bellinger?
Thanks. Okay, so I'm sorry to make you switch, but I think the easier place to find my question on the other budget is starting on page 5.
Can you give
I'm
me
so
some?
sorry.
No, you're good.
It's so little too. So page 5, and really it's that, yeah, right there. See the proposed budget for 2022, 2023, all the way in the right-hand corner is 51,877,000. And if you go back down to page 3, our projected revenue is 48,538,963. So there's the discrepancy, and I'm still not.
That's
I'm just
because
trying to make sure we're sustainable.
that's because on page 5, that is your expenditures by classification. And that is
Right.
all classifications, not just operating. So you'll see you have
Right.
capital outlay of 23.1 million. That
Right.
includes all of that. It also includes our restricted funds of 231,000. That's our court funds and our PEG cable funds. That is all classifications, and that is not just operating. That is operating and restricted and reserves is what that 51 is. And so on the page before that, on page 4, you'll see that by function, you'll see the operating piece at the top, the 28.4 million plus the 23 in capital plus the 231 in restricted equals that 51 million. It's just, by function, it's split between operating and others, and by classification, it's just all of those.
Well, I see that page 4 and 5 are the same, but what about page 3? That shows the revenues. that we
Page 3
expect.
has the $20 million CO issuance. We have bond proceeds there. And so,
But if you look at the 2022-23 proposed budget, the total general fund revenues are 48,538,000,
right,
whereas the total general fund expenses are 51 million.
right. That includes all of your reserve purchases. So that $3 million in reserves are there because, like I said, that you have to show every function and every classification. So the bonds are there, the 20 million, and then the 3 million from reserves are there, as well as the 231,000 that is restricted funds. So when you look on page 2, you have 3 columns. You have the operating, you have the COs, and you have the restricted. All of those, the spreadsheets after that, those are all on one thing. You can't put them in 3 different columns the way that they require us to reflect this.
Okay, so if I understand this correctly, we are depleting our reserves by $3 to $4 million this year. We have storm sewers that are an annual expense of $1 million that aren't being treated as an annual expense out of our budget. And we have 835,000, whatever that figure is, that are personnel that we will have to pick up one way or the other in the next year's budget that is not being treated as an annual expense. I am a little concerned about where we're heading with this. We're proposing to borrow money, we're using up our savings, and we're using up our savings on annual costs. And that's not a balanced budget. That's all I'm going to say about that. In addition, it doesn't, when we're talking about looking to make sure we don't lose employees, the employees we're losing are our police department. And that's dangerous, and this budget doesn't address that. So I am going to have serious issues when we talk about the budget next time, because we have annual expenses that are not being treated as annual expenses, and we are not addressing our most significant loss of our very, very important employees in the police force. So those are my statements on that. And if we do approve a tax rate, I would like to have a balanced budget that you will have to go back to the drawing board with that and find a way to balance the budget so the annual expenses are not included, taken from reserves.
Okay.
I think Mr. Mahar probably said it all better than I did. I wished he were sitting in my chair, but I think he probably reflected my concerns very well.
So I want to jump to kind of follow up on Councilmember Bellinger's questions about the police department. Mr. Canizares, I really would, in Ms. Kerbo's new programs, could we pull that up? I'm sorry, I keep making y'all jump back and forth between presentations. I know when we discussed this in July, we were talking about the modified STEP program. And my understanding is that we have, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we have employees in the police department that have been with us a significant amount of time. And when we introduced our new salary schedule, whenever we adjusted that we placed employees lower in the scale than they would have normally been if they had worked when that scale started through to, say, if they had been with us 20 years, they were placed in a lower category than someone that's at 12 now when they get to 20. Is that correct? I know that's convoluted, but are we paying our career police officers at the rates they deserve to be paid, I guess would be my question. based on our salary schedule? And why can we not implement this Tier 2 program this year?
Well, I don't really know how to answer that first part of the question. Are we paying our career employees as best as we could? I mean, certainly we all would have liked to pay.
Mr. Canizares, could you come up to
Oh.
the, so
I think she can see
you're
me.
kind of a ghost here.
Yeah, watch the water. Councilmember, it's hard to say if everybody's being paid, especially the police department, everyone's being paid as much as they could be. I mean,
Certainly.
everyone's gonna wanna get paid more. I think part and parcel, I think, we are looking at making some improvements in the police department operationally, certainly cultural-wise, with different leadership. One of the things that we do have in this proposed budget is obviously funds to incentivize new recruits, to address assignment pay that's never been addressed historically in past budgets. This is the first time that it's been brought to our attention that it needed to be addressed because we were addressing some of those issues in the fire department, but not in the police department. There was lack of differentiation between a patrol officer and a person working in criminal investigations. And there is a distinct difference. But that was brought to our attention by interim Police Chief Scott Weems, so we addressed it immediately. As far as the modified step, we can certainly do that. One of the things that we had mentioned to you all is we had very little time to put and craft the plan together, so it needs more time. Our staff, Ms. Curbo, and certainly the remainder of our team have been working on the budget for a number of months. We certainly have been working on a number of new initiatives that were proposed by this council with the tax freeze and also with the additional exemptions, which again, I think we got there, but it took some heavy lifting, a lot of work with Ms. Curbo and to the appraisal district. And then also, obviously, the CO issuance has been also a project that we've been working on. So we can certainly implement this. I think part of that is the expense and willing to raise taxes to get there, and that's certainly a purview for the council. That's why we submitted it. We know that there was interest from council to do so, and if you're willing to do it, we're willing to do it.
So here's my fear, and maybe it's misplaced, but those guys that have been with us 20 years, and I mean this across our departments, I don't want us to lose anyone, and I want to say, Ms. Curbo and all of our staff, thank you for what you do. As a public employee myself that is under a lot of the same constraints that you are, I respect what you do, and I don't know how you do it, even though I do some of the similar things. It's a hard job. But those guys that have been with us 15, 20 years, we see that we are continuing to lose those guys. They can't wait another year. Okay. We can't continue to say, we'll do something this year, we're gonna do assignment pay this year, and then next year we're gonna try and address the salary discrepancies. We need to do it now.
Yeah. Well, and again, when we submitted that during the budget presentations that were made to council by Assistant Chief Weems, again, that was an opportunity to, again, because he explained our concerns. We all have those concerns with the number of vacancies of people we've lost. We've lost people for a variety of reasons, obviously, whether it's change of careers, just retirements, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely we need to address it. I'm certainly not going to turn away if the council is looking to fund these. We'll certainly, try to make it work. I mean, absolutely. This is not shying away of it. Our request was we didn't believe that we were fully ready to implement it. Now, I think in this spreadsheet, I know it's hard to see because it's somewhat small print, but we've identified what we believe is the first year's effect of implementing a modified step. My recommendation, though, is again, because of public safety and the nature in which they do, if you do it for police, there's going to be an expectation you do it for fire.
I don't have any problem with that.
And so, but if the council is willing to proceed with that, we're ready to go. I think we still need some vetting, but this is sort of a start. with this effort as far as based on what we know today, but it will be an ongoing cost going forward.
I completely agree that it is going to be ongoing, and I think we're at a tipping point for public safety in our city, and I think we have to make strides and say, we're not gonna kick the can down the road, we're gonna fix it now so we don't continue to lose great employees.
Yeah. Understood?
Councilmember
Mr.
Bellinger.
Gaines, yeah, I have two questions. First, I was a little bit confused. Are you saying that the retention of our long-term police force, that we weren't aware of that until recently? How?
No, ma'am, what I said was, I'm sorry, go ahead, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I just apologize. I didn't mean to put words in your
Oh.
mouth. Would you
No, ma'am,
clarify?
not the retention. Certainly, we know that we were losing officers. One of the emails that, and I don't have it in front of me, and I'm kind of recalling it by memory. One of the emails that Chief Weems had sent out to council was sort of a 5-year look back of folks who have come into the organization, the police department, who come into the organization, who have left in the organization. And I believe it was in fiscal year 2018, 2019, and again, I'm going by memory, that we had a number of officers, sworn positions that had left, and so we had a deficit position. Over the last few years, we've been able to make some strides, and here recently, we've lost more than we've gained. So we started with a deficit a few years ago, we were making strides, but again, we just never got caught up. What I was saying earlier to Councilmember Huckabee is, that during this budget process, when we were working with then Assistant Chief Weems, now Interim Chief Weems, it was brought to our attention that we did not have assignment pay for our patrol officers, for our officers. In some positions, I think we did, but in majority of them, we did not. And there was a disparity between what the fire department was doing versus what the police department. And so we addressed that immediately with him as we began discussing the budget. And so when that was presented to council about the concerns that we've had with vacancies, number one was we needed to find a way to recruit better and incentivize recruitment. Number two, we needed to find a way to not just promote people, but to encourage people to develop within the organization through special assignments. And then lastly, with the conversation we just had just a few moments ago, was the long term is how do you retain and how do you keep people through a STEP program. And so those are the kind of the three prongs that we discussed. But no, we've known all along that we've had vacancies. I mean, we see it. I hear it all the time. But it was just the lack of assignment pay and the lack of pay distinguishing the differentiation between a patrol officer and an individual working in criminal investigations or CID. There was no pay differentiation, even though there's a different skill set. Those are the things that were brought to our attention that we wanted to address immediately. And that, in this budget, it accounts for that.
So I have heard months and months ago about the issues in pay for police officers and the difficulty in being able to retain them. And I'm just really dismayed by the loss of 6 police officers, not including the retired Chief Seavey, since May 1st. And I do believe we're bleeding police officers. I question, it's not that I don't care about any other employee. I think all of our employees are important. But if we are losing police officers, why do we have to upgrade other positions to match police officers when we're not losing those employees? We have to make some very, very, very hard decisions in this budget. I don't think we can please everybody, but we can't afford to not. And now, I'm not talking about next year, I'm not talking about in 2 months. Now we have to pay our police force. And wherever that comes out of, I think we have to make these decisions in this budget. And I hope you bring us a budget next week that reflects that.
Okay, I guess at this point, really, I'm just looking for direction from council. Do you want to add the modified step to the budget or don't you? And if you do, we'll fold it in.
Well, let me clarify that we do have to have that decision before we vote on the tax rate next, because that does increase the tax rate. And so in order to set the max, I need to know if we're gonna include those steps, because that does increase the tax rate. And so before we vote on a proposed tax rate, I need to know if we are gonna include steps or not.
I'm confused about this. I think we just said that we can change items in the budget next time. It means we might have to delete some things, or you might have to come back with a balanced budget. But that doesn't mean, I mean, we can change the budget, right? Between now and next week. I mean, you can, we're voting on,
We can change the budget, but the next item on the agenda is setting the maximum tax rate. And
Right.
so in order for us to fund additional items tonight, being the step, that is an increase in the tax rate unless you have items that you want us to cut from the budget to fund that.
so I would like you all to figure out where to cut them. So for example, you have a variety of things that are for all employees. You might have to go back. It's kind of like, you give us this budget that includes taking money out of savings for annual expenses and not addressing our police force. It's up to you all to give us a balanced budget that addresses our needs.
Councilmember, I just respectfully disagree. The budget's been filed. We've, in our opinion, have provided you a balanced budget with revenues and expenditures. There's absolutely no doubt that we are drawing down some fund balances, but we had actual excess fund balances. We are still maintaining our 25% reserve by policy, and on top of that, an additional $2.5 million above that. So if you look at the detail, there is a number of expenditures that are being recommended to be used for those, with those reserves, whether it's electrical upgrades in Festival Park, fire station maintenance, which was addressed earlier today by one of the speakers, work at the cemetery, our annual street rehab, certainly a number of other capital projects and expenditures that are occurring, a long list. I won't go through all those. And included as part of that, this program where we're looking at this retention program for employees on one time. If you're wanting to do all of those things, or a good chunk of a good majority of those things with existing revenues, I need some direction from council. Are you wanting for us to go through, where do you want us to cut? I'm telling you, I've filed with you a balanced budget, and if you want us to cut expenditures, it's in people. And so I need to know from the council, three of you, which areas to look at. Because right now, we have provided you a budget that we believe maintains our levels of service for our city, and nothing more. And so if we want to reduce services, I just need to know where. Or if we want to reduce a number of projects, I just need to know which projects you won't cut. And I don't know how else to ask and say. I don't know what else to tell you. If there's something that you don't want to do, then just tell me what you don't want to do, and then we will look at that if that's the consensus of council.
So could we get Ms. Curbo, can you remind me which page the new programs, is it in our packet, or is it
This
just in
right
that?
here?
Yeah, is that in,
So everything that is in blue, those numbers are already baked in here.
is there,
Okay.
is that in, when I say in, is there a specific page that I can look at, or
No,
is it just
no,
already
because
built in?
So like the city gardener and parks, that $29,000, that's part of parks budget as personnel. So
Gotcha.
that's part of the parks budget. We've already built those things into the budget that we've proposed. The only thing that's not built into the proposed budget are the step things, and the system tech and the part-time custodian. Those are the only 4 operational things that are not built in currently.
So I guess as a suggestion for us moving forward, which I don't have the solution, maybe a solution, and of course I know I'm taking up a lot of airtime here, but maybe we can look at these new programs and employees and prioritize those, maybe even as a group, to decide which ones we want to do and which ones we don't. I think I understand the constraint that we're under with setting a maximum tax rate. If we decided tonight, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but if we decide we want to do the modified step programs, we will have to, for the budget that we have to have a higher tax rate, which if we decide next week that we're going to cut other things, then we can certainly lower that down. I think that.
And I have calculated what that tax rate will be if we add those. I have calculated what that tax rate will need to be to add those step into it. So I'm prepared to go whichever direction we want to go with that tax rate tonight. But like you said, if between now and next week y'all decide y'all want to eliminate some of these newer positions, or you want to eliminate some existing positions or some existing programs, we can always change that, and that drops the tax rate. As long as we go below what we set tonight, we're fine.
Got a comment from the public? I'm sorry, I've got one before you, Mr. Mahar.
Hi, my name is Brandy Cartwright, and I am up here to, so I started coming to city council meetings in 2014, and I knew nothing, absolutely nothing about city government, but I was part of the Parks Advocacy League, and we were interested in the city putting funds where we needed them in the parks that had been neglected for many, many years. And over the last, I guess it's 8 years now, that I've been coming to city council meetings. And specifically since we had our new city manager, I have seen a big difference in what the city is willing to spend on various things. I feel like before we were being extremely conservative. Mr. Bolden's been here for a long time. He can probably let me know if that's accurate or not, because I was still figuring a lot of things out. But I remember one of the first meetings I came to, they talked about somebody was leaving a department, and they had decided not to refill that position. And that money that was allocated for that employee was going to go into the reserves. And this happened multiple times as I was watching, and it was just one of the things that I started to wonder about, cutting positions that had been going on for many years, I think. And like I said, I don't know the specifics. You can probably ask for that information. But just as a layperson trying to figure out what was going on in the city, I saw many, many cuts over the years that they never seemed to refill. So I think that a lot of our things that we've been doing for the last few years has been to get us back up to a normal level of functioning, because there was a lot of things that just weren't done. And granted, 2008 was a recession and we had to make cuts and all of that stuff. But I feel like the city didn't ever come out of that. And I moved here in 2011, and the parks were in very sad shape, and hadn't been updated in many years because of various cuts and recession and stuff. So I just want to kind of give a perspective that I think that our city is very conservative when you compare it to Lufkin. The median tax rate is lower here. We're at like 916 compared to 1,100 there. And so we are a very conservative city, but that's also been seen in our upkeep and things that need to be done. So I just wanted to give that perspective, and I know I talked a lot, and I was really nervous because I don't know a lot about numbers, and accounting makes my head explode, and you're amazing, Ms. Carbo. So anyway, that's all.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Mahar?
Thank you for letting me come back up. Three things, I'll be very quick. On the insurance fund, internal service fund for insurance, it's fully funding means coming from the employer side and the employee side. You've raised the employer side by $65 a month, so the taxpayers are paying for it, the employees are not paying anything more a month. That's abnormal in current, everybody's premium goes up a little bit. The employer takes a portion and the employee takes a portion. Now we're saying the employee doesn't have to take a portion, therefore that is a raise to them. But the point is that you should fully fund it out of those two areas, not rely on fund balance to fund it. Second thing that I want to point out is that, if I mistake, you correct me if I'm wrong, we've never had less year-over-year sales tax decrease. We're at 8.1 million now, but we are decreasing the budget down to 7 million from 7.2 million this year, even though we're making 8 million. There's $1 million there you should be budgeting before you take it out of reserves. During the year, you can do a budget amendment if you don't make that.
Actually, we budgeted 7 million this year, we're budgeting 7.6 next year.
Are you? Okay, I misunderstood.
No, you're fine.
Okay. The third thing that, and may I call you Mario rather than that, he said something that was very, very important that I think needs to be emphasized. You're talking about your employee retention program, your STEP program. That's a long-term problem, a long-term solution. And listen to him when he said, we're not really ready to implement the whole thing at this point. That's being conservative, that's looking at the whole program over a long term, and I think that rather than jumping in and doing something very quickly, listen to your city manager on that and do something that's going to work for the long term. You start doing some quick fix, then it affects next year, next year, next year. Have a solid plan that will work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, Mr. Bolden, you.
You know, personnel issues is always contentious. It's always going to be an ongoing cost. Usually when a new leadership team comes into place, especially in the private industry, and the budget is out of whack, they lay off people. That decision wasn't made in this case. And I admire the leadership team in the direction they're going. It's just, even with modified step system, you got merit system, you got, within that merit system, you have expertise in a certain field, whether CDL driver or CDL driver that's specialized. We need to budget our personnel as we are required to keep people. And if it costs more to do that at this stage, we should do it. Just a thought.
Mr. Huckabee?
Mr. Bolden, I agree with you. I certainly wouldn't advocate for us jumping off into uncharted territory with any program that was going to, even a modified step system. I appreciate your comments, I really do. And maybe, Ms. Curbo, Mr. Canizares, you can address maybe a little more about the STEP program. So what are our hang-ups? What's slowing us down? Why are we not there? That's purely me not knowing. I'm asking.
So, year before last, when we did the complete salary survey and started with the new compensation plan, the intent of that council and that administration at that time was to shift from a step system that we had in place in the past to a completely pay-for-performance merit system. In the past, our STEP system basically maxed out at year 10. And so if you were a 10-year employee, 2-year employee, till you were a 10-year employee, every year you were paid an additional, I think it was $750 per year. Once you got to year 10, there was no more money. Steps stopped at year 10. And so for 15, 20, 25-year employees, they didn't get any more, okay? And so that was kind of the fallacy of the first step system. And so when we created the new compensation plan, we rolled all of those step pays, those, $750 per year, into the new base pay, with the anticipation that we were going to transition into a merit system. And that has not come to pass because we had three HR directors within one calendar year. And so now that is part of the process. We have been looking at the evaluations and that sort of thing. This step system here literally came up a month ago, Scott. We had our first meeting, and the impetus of it was looking at Lufkin's pay scale, because we were trying to make sure that we were attracting police officers, and we had to see what Lufkin was doing. And so they have their civil service, and so they are set up completely different than us, but they do have a step system. And so but theirs is on the front end. So you move steps very fast in the beginning of your career and then slower towards the end. Well, our need here was we were working with the sign-on bonuses for the recruitment. We needed the retention piece. So what we looked at originally was to flip that step system so that the first few years you didn't move as fast, but after you got to year 10 or 12, you started moving through the steps a little bit faster. And so I have a spreadsheet that's about this big and it's this long, and it's just our first guess at how to make this happen. And so we started with police, and then we did fire. Well, at the end of the day, fire and police, their structures are different, and they have a different goal in mind where they want to end with their step system. And so there's a lot that has to be decided between the departments. Are we going to try to do them the same? Are we going to be able to do them in different categories, in different ways? And at what point do we stop that step? So it was 10 years ago. Is it 20 years? Is it 25? Are we going to have people that are here for 40 years? Do we go all the way? There's a lot of pieces to that. And we literally just sat down and started this last month. And so when he says we're not ready to implement it, it's because I feel confident in the numbers, but it's how we're plugging those people in. So a 15-year officer could be on step, let's say 15 under one plan. I did this in multiple steps, multiple plans, and this plan I may plug them in on step 18 to see what that does, and that it's an effect that just waterfalls over everyone. And so what we have to do is we have to literally look department wide and figure out where putting those steps, where those breaks are, that is the most beneficial to us attracting and retaining folks. And so there's pieces to it. We have a good start, but we're not where we are ready to say this is exactly what it's going to cost. Now, the thing is, understand this is year one to start it. Year two is about, for both departments, is about $70,000. Year three was like $62,000. So it's just an ongoing increase. So yes, it's an increase this year, but once you commit to doing the step system, understand every year as people are moving through those steps, it's increasing the need for additional revenue to cover those operational expenses ongoing. And so, we're close, but we're prepared to say we can hit the streets with it tomorrow.
So I guess my question would then be, can we budget for it and budget for it as a promise that we're going to do this, that we are going to take care of this issue, and then work out the details throughout the fiscal year?
Absolutely.
And if that means that the increased operational amounts are less or more, then we come back and decide as you're working those details out, but plan that we are going to implement it and we're going to budget for it now, and not say we're going to wait until next year and leave it to another, as the mayor said, leave it to another council.
Right.
Yeah. But the retention pay, as it's kind of focused towards public safety, is kind of that stopgap measure.
The one-time payment is because if you'll recall, in the retention payment, we increased all police officers to that maximum, even though they are in that threshold where they should have gotten the $1950 annual payment. We've moved them to the $2,600 annual payment for all of the police officers. So regardless if those officer positions are above the 50,000 threshold, they're still eligible for that max there. And so that piece of it is also part of that one-time payment.
And that's my concern with that is they're gonna say, yeah, you're doing this for 1 year, and then they'll tell us again and again and again that we're gonna do this next year, and then we'll do this next year, and we'll address it. I'm saying, let's address it now, not later.
So in reality, and Mario and I have discussed this a little bit, I don't see any feasible way that we could start it before January 1, because we need a month or two to actually calculate and get the process in place. It has to go to HR and payroll the month before, and so I feel like we can get there, but I don't think it would be before January 1.
Again, that's why my suggestion is let's budget for it and implement it as you're able to. But just that being a promise that we're doing it. It's not, we're not waiting until October of '23.
Right.
We're doing it now.
And that first year
So
cost is
let-
about how much?
The first year cost for both police and fire is $267,500. That makes a difference on the tax rate that we'll be proposing of 1.267 cents. So
But that's for the full year, and if we can't implement it till January, would we not pay for half of it?
3/4 of
Or
it.
3/4? Yeah, that's right, 3/4 of it.
I mean, that's a,
Now, as for tonight, I have the tax rate calculated for the whole thing. I do not have it calculated for 3/4 of it, though.
Gotcha.
So, I mean,
But
but
it's
like
a
I said,
maximum
but
rate.
tonight is the maximum,
Yeah.
so we can always come down from that. So,
Yes, sir.
I will be short. My name is Chris Englert. I've been trying to follow the dollars and what's in reserve, what's not. I've gotten a little confused. That's okay. But I do think that we've had an issue here that is of great importance, that we're losing police officers. 6. We're down, it seems to me, about 20% of what we've lost and what we should have. I don't know whether we ought to have a tax increase or whether you can find it in the budget, but I think that we need to have a fully staffed police force that is well-trained. When we lose these people, we lose all the investment that we've put into these people for training and stuff. You hire new people, you don't have the talent that you had when you lost an experienced one. We need to do whatever we need to do to keep our police force trained and fully staffed. Thank you.
thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Bellinger?
So I don't know of any business that, if they're losing, valued employees in one section, that hitches, some kind of retention to all the other employees or to even other people we're not losing. I would unhitch the whole STEP program. You may need a different STEP program for fire than you do from police. Right now, we're losing police. And we have an employee retention package that, by the way, was only dropped on us at a meeting. We didn't even see it ahead of time at the very end of this whole budgeting process. That is extremely frustrating. It was dropped right at the end in the middle of a meeting. It wasn't even posted on the city council agenda. We just found it at the meeting. I was very, very surprised. So we have an employee retention package of $823,000 out of reserves, and we're losing police officers. That's a big problem. We need police officers. We need to unhitch it. That's enough.
well, and I just would like to add for employees across the city, we all understand how important our police and fire are. We do, believe me, we do. But we are not only losing employees there. My entire department has turned over in the last year. I am the only person in my department that has been there through this change. we have turnover in all our areas. But yes, we have a significant problem in the police department, but please do not think for a second that we do not have issues in every area of the city. Our employees are looking for other jobs. They are, I promise. So that's
I
all I
believe
wanted to say.
Are you understaffed right now?
No, I'm fully staffed, but they're all brand new people.
Right. I understand that. I was looking at the, at the positions that are available, and that really struck me, so.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I keep asking
No, you're
questions.
fine, you're fine.
Do we have metrics on the employee retention across departments? Could we see data on that to say, can we, quantify where we're losing the most? I'm not saying that I agree with you that we're losing across the city. Can we quantify it and try and figure out so we can be really targeted about how we're incentivizing people to come work for us and to stay with us?
Excuse me, as far as trying to incentivize people to come work for us, we have a number of positions in the organization that are hard to fill. Typically those might be in IT, engineering, building inspections. We've had a chief building official position open for almost 2 years. Those are hard positions to find, even in a metropolitan area. They just are because of the skill sets that are required. So really the philosophy we've taken, and I appreciate Public Works and Case Opperman's I believe he's still in the back. He's still in the back. So we've taken the position of trying to grow our own. So just last week we had a water operator license class that we administered here locally. We had, I guess, 5, maybe half a dozen of our own employees, but we also invited members from other communities to come in and get those certifications. We're doing that with CDL. We're going to start doing some CDL classes so we can start growing our own. That's the one thing that we can do, is we can grow our talent. We have wonderful opportunities in our organization to bring people in, maybe at lower level positions. We pour resources into them with, whether it's through training, encourage them to get licensing or certifications, and that's how you promote. Doesn't mean that it lasts forever, because you are making an investment in someone, and it's very possible they could get poached from someone else to another organization, whether it may be Lufkin or it could be to other organizations around the state. But really the philosophy is if we can't draw the talent to this region just because of, for whatever reason, the remoteness, the lack of housing opportunities, the lack of jobs for the spouse, because it's a package deal when it comes to some of our employees, we have to find ways to grow our own. I have encouraged Benita Hall, our HR director, Human Resources director, to look at positions where we've had issues hiring, and if we need to help incentivize sign-on incentives for some of those hard-filled positions, we need to do that. And it's more than just doing it for police. As we mentioned, we're also doing that for dispatchers, because those are difficult jobs to fill. They're very stressful, but it just takes time. And again, as a person that has family members in the police department, working in, not in this department, but working in other police departments, policing's hard. And we're not just losing people in Nacogdoches. It's an issue across the country that police officers are short in all departments. And we're seeking the talent from all over. The same pool of applicants are being sought out by a number of agencies. And so it's not just throwing money at people. It's obviously finding them an opportunity to not only find a job here, but hopefully thrive and grow. We're trying to do this. We can certainly do this with some of these other things that we've discussed tonight. But it's not easy being a police officer. We've implemented lateral transfer programs where we can go and find officers that are experienced from other agencies to short circuit and accelerate them being on the street, so they're not having to go through 5 to 7 months of the police academy. That benefits us. But it also slots that new employee in a much higher salary schedule than where a veteran officer who's been here a number of years, we may slot them at somewhat the same level, even though they haven't been here for at any time. But we're slotting them because of their experience. So we're trying. Our police department, Scott Weems and Dan Terrell and their teams are working hard to try to find ways to turn over every stone and find qualified men and women to be Nacogdoches police officers. It's just a hard position to fill.
Well, as a proponent of higher education and post-secondary education, I think this is a perfect opportunity for the city to grow our own employees, and to Mr. Bartlett and I have discussed this at great length on how we can partner not just with our own employees and grow our own, but to partner with school districts and CTE programs and try and really move straight from where they're at in a classroom within our county, move them straight into city employment and help them start a career here and build their roots even deeper in Nacogdoches.
Agreed, wholeheartedly. So really, we're at a point now, we're just needing direction.
Yeah.
Do you want to add, again, the funding, even though we don't have everything fully vetted on this modified step program, are you wanting to add this funding to the budget and the appropriate tax rate for it?
So really tonight, all we've got to do is set the maximum tax rate. And so did you tell us what that was? To
Well,
be
I
able- to be able to
did, but that
fund-
did not include the step.
To be able to fund the step?
So if we're gonna fund the step, I will, yeah, that will be in the next step, but I can tell you, hold on.
Well, I'm sorry, so do we need, we don't need any action on
No
these?
action on this, other than I just need to know if you want to include the step at some point. Do we wanna build it in? Because if so, then I'm gonna ask you to set a tax rate maximum that is gonna include me adding that step
Right.
in the future. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so adding fire and police step is going to take the proposed tax rate to 0.584880. And I'll have that on the screen when we get to the point where we want to vote. But that's just for this point. It's a 1.267 increase in the proposed tax rate.
Okay, council, what do you think about setting that for the maximum?
So we don't have to do that yet, because we've got that as the next item. All I need right now is to know whether we want to include the step, which will increase the
Well, it
tax rate.
depends on if we're willing to.
Right.
to set the max, set
Yeah,
the maximum
right.
at that.
I want to clarify, again, I think we're hitching a lot of, I mean, I love our firemen, I don't understand why we're not focusing on police. I would like to see that, focused on the police, because that's who we're losing. I mean, 6 tenured people since May 1st, we have to pay them money. It could be that some of these other incentives that we've offered have been fine for the firemen. I don't even know what their base pay is. I just know we're not losing them, we're losing our police. So I would like to see that unhitched, see what it takes to keep our police force.
Opinions?
One of the things is, as far as keeping a cohesive workforce, totally, you have to treat everybody fairly. Now, you can have groups, 1, 2, 3 groups. One would be a high pay scale, 2 different and on down. But if you do well, you have to not disinclude anybody when you often, whether it's a pay raise, a certain percent, or if there's a bonus, you have to include everybody.
So I have a question regarding these two, and Mr. Canizares, you may be able to address this, and maybe even the fire chief and the police chief. Just offhand, how many law enforcement agencies do we have within a 2 or 3 county range? It's
There's
the number of law enforcement agencies in our area.
I would not be able to tell you that.
Just within the county,
I
there's,
probably won't either.
there's 7 or 8 or 8 to 10
Oh, there's more than that.
in the county?
Oh, in the
And
county,
then if
in
you
just
say
this
2 or
county.
3?
Yes, we have count.
In the surrounding, what it would be to be able to drive to a job and live in Nacogdoches, where could someone who is a police officer go for a career department?
Well, if you wanna go to the highest paying one right now, you can go to Lufkin. I don't know how we're doing it, but we have attracted people from Lufkin and Angelina County and some out of Trinity County that currently work for us, and they have a long tenure with us. And, we've managed to keep them, but they could cut their drive down considerably and go to work for Lufkin PD right now, make more money in the long run, and, we're just wondering why they're not doing it. We're hoping they don't. So, there's 2 cities right now, Lufkin and Nacogdoches. We're all isolated. We're very isolated, and so that's who we're competing with. The surrounding agencies, the other ones, they're good agencies. I'm not saying they're not. They don't have, I guess, the tax base to pay city employees or deputies the rate we do, or the rate Lufkin does. So your main 2 are us, Nacogdoches and Lufkin.
Beyond that, there are other options.
There
If they were
are.
willing to drive a little farther.
For
but-
less money.
For less money, certainly. And
So you get to maybe Tyler or?
When you get to Tyler, you're in a different class. You're dealing with Tyler, Longview, Marshall. And so they're they're competing with each other.
Like Henderson is,
Right.
would not.
Henderson would lose to Tyler, Marshall, or Longview.
so if we had people that lived in northern Nacogdoches County that didn't have to drive all that far to a Jacksonville, Tyler, that area, I mean, we would stand a chance to lose them.
Right, and we did try to hire somebody from Tyler PD, and he came down for about 3 days and went back to Tyler. So they are really on the ball to try to retain their people, and so I guess they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. And we thought we had him, and he lives in Cushing, so.
So that's my example.
Yes. So we're isolated. We're not able to pay what they pay and I would say the medium cities like Tyler, Marshall, Longview. So we're kind of stuck with what we got between us and Lufkin.
So talk to us about a plan. How do we help you build your police department in all these discussions that we're having?
Well, cut the news off for one, but no. Pam really, she hit it right on the money. We've discussed this. We went over it over and over and over. And we decided that when Lufkin is paying, when they're slowing their pay down as you progress through the steps, we decided to try to increase our pay for retention purposes. The sign-on bonus, that should attract somebody, that should get them through the first few years when we don't pay as much or as often. And then we get up to, I think we decided on a 10-year plan to stop and start paying every step, every year. So I think that might incentivize people to look at us for the long term instead of Lufkin where it slows down at, what, 10? 9 or 10?
We flip-flopped it.
Right. So we think that plan's one of the better ones. We're gonna get with Chief Kiplinger and talk to him about his plan with the fire department and try to get ours as close together as we can. He's going with the, and I don't wanna take his glory, he's going with operator or firefighter 1, firefighter 2, and that comes in steps or phases. And we can do the same with our certificate pay, because we kind of have the same plan. We have to have so many years of service before we can go to intermediate, advanced, masters. So we discussed all this, and we think we have a good plan in place. We know we have a good plan in place with the assignment pay, and it doesn't just include CID. With the skill set, it includes street crimes, FTO pay, that's field training officer, SWAT, and hostage negotiation, and traffic accident reconstruction. So there's a different assignment pays, different developmental programs that you can start once you start your career there. And so it incentivizes these young officers to develop themselves. still, sorry. I have a habit of beating on the podium and it bothers Jan. Get a clicker. But it develops these younger officers, and I think it's gonna work out. I think this plan that we have, overall, I know we went through tier 1 and tier 2 right now. Tier 3 is the step plan. And so I think with all that combined, it's a good start in both recruiting and retention.
What about the retention pay?
Oh, now the separate, that's apples and oranges. The retention pay, which I refer to as a inflation pay 2.0, because it's really, that's what it is. So that's totally separate. That's citywide. That's to get us through this year without having to put it on, attach it to the regular budget. So that's apples and oranges.
How important is it?
It is important. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm just saying it doesn't fall in step with the pay that we're implementing, the step pay. So there's that retention pay which is true retention pay, and then this is retention / inflation pay, 1 year.
The step pay? Okay.
Step pay is ongoing, right?
No,
Yeah.
right.
So I mean, a plan of trying to get step pay in place by January.
Sounds good to me.
You need the retention piece maybe to get us to January.
Right, for the inflation. That's my story.
Thank you, Chief.
So,
Okay.
so wait, Chief, question.
Where's she at?
My whole question
All
is,
right.
sorry, I know
I lost her.
will that retention pay, keep your police officers? That's really my biggest question.
Okay,
What will keep your police officers right now?
so which retention pay are you talking about? The one-time pay or the step implementation?
I'm asking you, what will keep your, it's not the 820, I guess it's the $1,950 or $2,600 for a police officer. Is that going to keep somebody, or do we have to do the step right now for you to keep your police officers?
Okay,
Your
so,
tenured.
so one of them is to say, hey, we as a city, we're trying to get you through this inflationary period so you don't go somewhere else that pays more just on a whim. The second half of it is we want to keep you even past this year that we're talking about, the inflationary year. We want to do this for you to make sure you do stay 10 more years, 15 more years. This one is, hey, we're trying to do something right now. We don't want you leaving just because you're having a bad time. So this is what we're offering. It's a one-time deal for quarterly payments, and try to bear with us until we get you over the hump. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but is that going to work? That's the whole question.
I think it
doesn't
will
mean-
work.
Since we've already done the 300,000, that didn't keep at least 6 of your officers. And this is, something similar. That was $300,000 just a few months ago. And this is what, $200,000 dispersed quarterly.
Okay, so
So we really need to set a goal. We had goals, but we haven't met them, and they haven't been. We haven't had a measurable, very specific measurable objective. We want to keep our police officers over the next 3 months. We do not want to lose anybody. What will we need to do even over the next 3 months?
I think when the assignment pay starts coming out, that gives the officers, I guess it tells the officers that, hey, we're investing in you, we want to keep you, and this is what we're doing. And I know the assignment pay is already, that's tier 2, that's already in effect. It's not approved yet,
Yeah,
but it's
right.
already built in. So the next tier is the step incentive, the step pay.
So that's what we need to do right now.
So if you'll remember back the very first time that we discussed, and I don't remember if it was Scott or me, but I think it was probably Scott. We laid this out in 3 steps basically for the police department. We have 3 issues. One is the recruitment, and we addressed that with the sign-on bonuses. The second piece was the retention, and we tried to address that with the assignment pay. The third step, which was the step system, was a way to move all of our employees through the pay grades on an ongoing basis. It's not just a one-time fix, it's an every year commitment to show that if you're going to be an officer here, we're gonna say, you've been here 3 years, well, you can look 17 years into the future and see where you should be if you're performing well. And so the third, which was the step system, was basically a way to move our employees through a pay grade system that we set up in 2020. Originally, to move through it on a pay for performance only, we're changing that back to a step system, but an ongoing step system for more than just the first 10 years. And so that last piece there, we got the recruitment, we got the retention, but it is a step further on the retention piece. It's actually a commitment to go forward every year with whatever this cost is going to be on an ongoing basis. And so there were 3 pieces, and we've addressed 2 of them. The step was just the last way, because we can do the assignment pay and the sign-on bonuses, but everybody's gonna stay where they are if we don't do something as far as moving them through the pay grades. Because next year, if we go back to the COLA system, that doesn't move them through the pay grades. That's an across-the-board increase. And so that doesn't move anybody as far as their career progression. And so that was where the step was going. So they are different. The assignment pay and the step do get us to 2 different places, but they're both, I think, needed.
Any other comments? Any?
Could we get Chief Kiplinger up here for just a second? I just want to ask that same question of you, just so I can have that dichotomy to understand the differences between the 2. And first of all, I want to say it's good to see you in person.
It's great to be here in person. Thank you. Could you repeat your question, please, Counselor?
I can. So the question was, in our immediate area, how many career fire departments do we have within a few county region?
So I don't have an exact answer for that. I have an answer that I can tell you that there are firefighters that live here that work in the Woodlands, firefighters that live here that work in multiple departments in Houston and Harris County. We have lots of firefighters that live here that work in Longview and Tyler, all because they pay more money than we do and offer more opportunities. When we talk about the STEP program for fire, and I realize that there's the issue that we're fully staffed, and I hate to call that an issue because I don't think it is an issue. But in 2023, almost half of the fire department will be eligible to retire. That 20-year mark with TMRS gives people opportunities to seek other activities. I've told you over and over that a 20-year firefighter has immense value compared to even a 10-year firefighter, or certainly a 5-year firefighter. So whatever we can do to retain those employees is absolutely essential. One of the big challenges that we have in the city of Nyack is there is no opportunity for career progression. An employee hires in, and without promoting or changing jobs, there's no way for them to move through their career and feel like they're better able to take care of their family. And what we've created in the fire department is called the Peter Principle, where people are encouraged to promote beyond the level that they're comfortable or their real competence. And so not everybody needs to be a supervisor, and not everybody wants to be a supervisor, but those employees still have a great deal of value. And a great firefighter is not necessarily a great station captain, and a great station captain is not necessarily a great battalion chief. But the only way for them to move into a nicer neighborhood or to take care of sending their kids to college is to take a promotional exam and try to move up in the organization. And that creates a real challenge for us.
I just want to go back to public comment and the discussion that Mr. Best brought to us. I think this is a comment more than anything that I want to ask you about the needs that the fire department has that we're budgeting for maintenance this year. you've been with the department a long time, 2 different stints, right? How many times have you been told no? I mean,
I can't tell you how many times we've been told no.
I mean, I'm not questioning whether he was right. I'm saying it happens a lot and it continues to happen. I think
And it was the availability of money, right? I mean, it's the allocation of assets. There's only so big a pot of money. And we realize that you can't have unsafe park playgrounds and you can't have streets that are full of potholes. But as far as prioritization, we got a lot of no's. Now, we also got a lot of yeses, and we've made tremendous progress in the almost 16 years that I've been back. With our fleet replacement, with our employee salaries have gotten much better. We still trail, certainly Longview and Tyler and those other places, but we really have a challenge with the long tenured employees and giving them a reason to want to stay.
And I think you hit the nail on the head by saying that we need to do this so we don't create a problem that we know exists in the police department, because we do have those guys that are hitting that 20-year mark, and it may become a problem, and we need to prevent it. We need to be proactive in this case.
And we have several hitting the 30-year mark in the next year. So, I mean, we've got 30-year veterans and 25-year veterans and 20-year veterans, and then making sure that we successfully hold on to a 15-year veteran. So that is important.
And on the capital improvements, on the maintenance, what all is going on? What in that, is it nearly 600,000?
And that's the 3 stations that were not in the city.
Yeah, so for Fire Station 1, it's trying to fix some foundation problems and repair a wall that's in danger of collapsing on the engine room. It's doing some roof repairs, and it's doing some cancer prevention items, which involve smoke removal or smoke filtration from the diesel particulate smoke that's in those fire stations. When you drive into your garage and turn your car off at the end of the day, you don't have a big challenge with all the chemicals that come out of your exhaust. But the nature of being in a fire station and a fire truck where we're in and out and running those vehicles, that diesel particulates are particularly harmful to firefighters. And so we need to do something to address that. And so primarily what we're doing is some basically what I would consider emergency repairs that we have put off for 3 or 4 years that should have been done 3 or 4 years ago. And then doing a little bit with regard to continuing our cancer mitigation program.
I just want to say that I'm assuming the wall at Station 1, it's that north wall of
Yes.
the station room, right?
The one with all the cracks?
The one with all the cracks,
Right.
yeah. I just want to say this. I want to thank you for what you do for the fire department. And Chief Weems, I also enjoyed going around with you. I don't want to seem like I'm not trying to put y'all against each other, even though we spent exactly the same amount of time together. It was right at 4.5 hours, but I really enjoyed going around, and this is the first time publicly I've had the chance to say it. You have a fine department, and I want to make sure that we continue to take care of your employees in any way that we can, and I think we need to do this.
Well, thank you for that. I would like to say that our firefighters work really hard for us every day, and we have a good team that does a really good job of taking care of this community. And so, thank you for your words.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I would like to thank both Chief Weems and Chief Kiplinger for their work and for all of their employees.
Okay, so do we want to move towards trying to implement the STEP program in January? Would that be the?
I would like for us to include that in our budget.
budget.
For both
Oh, that the budget?
departments.
For both fire and police. Yep, okay, that's all I need to know at this point.
So we,
Do you want to go over the calendar before we jump to the next item?
When we finish that, can we take a short recess?
Sure. I'm sorry I had to earlier.
I can't leave. I break quorum if I leave.
So real quickly, the budget calendar. We have a special called meeting next Wednesday, August the 24th. Another budget workshop, and this is where we need to make some final decisions on the projects and amounts for the CO, because that September the 2nd is when I will meet with the bond rating agencies, and I have to have some direction from y'all on what projects and what amounts we want to proceed with, if at all. Then the next scheduled city council meeting is September the 6th. That will be the public hearing on the budget. Y'all can choose to adopt the budget that night, or you can table it till the 13th. In the past couple of years, we have done the adoption of the budget and the tax rate on the same night, so we can have the public hearing. And then the next week, 7 days later, we've got a special called meeting on September the 13th. And we would have to start that meeting adopting the budget if we didn't do it on the 6th, then have the public hearing on the tax rate, and then adopt and ratify the tax rate on the 13th. And then on the 20th is the night that the ordinance that authorizes the issuance of the COs will be on the agenda. And that's all I have for that item.
Okay. So we're gonna stop before the last one? Sure.
5 minutes.
Continue with our discussion and move into E, City Council record vote on proposed tax rate for 2022-2023 fiscal year. Finance Director Kerbo.
Okay, so again, our taxable value for 2022-23 is a little over $2.1 billion. Of that, $46 million is a new property that was added to the roll. Our prior year tax rate, 61.6 cents. Our new revenue rate, 55.479 cents. And our voter approval rate is 61.572 cents. With the addition of the step pay for fire and police, that will bring our proposed tax rate tonight to 0.5848, which generates $10,720,000 in O&M and $1.6 million in debt. That generates $821,000 more than the last year's budget, and $264,000 of that is from the new value that was added this year. Looking at that on the average value of a home in Nacogdoches, the proposed tax rate of 58.48 generates a tax liability of $695.06, and the no new revenue rate generates $659.39, an increase of $35.67 annual tax liability for an average home size.
35.
35.67. So what we're doing tonight is just proposing a tax rate. We can, of course, come below that when we actually adopt and ratify the rate. We just cannot go above this. So this will be set as our maximum tax rate that we can ratify in September. And tonight's proposed tax rate will be 58.48 cents per $100.
Okay, any public comment? Okay, council comment? Mr. Bolden?
No, I'm good for the max.
Okay. Councilmember Bellinger?
I don't have anything to add.
Bugby?
I don't have anything to add either.
Do I have a motion for this rate?
That was
E?
0.5848.
I'll make a motion to use the proposed tax rate of 0.5848 per $100 evaluation.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
All right. Any further discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. All right, that carries. And we will adjourn to executive session for security pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.076, deliberations regarding the deployment of specific occasions for implementation of security personnel or devices or a security audit at 8:46. Thank you, sir. Hey, it is 9:20, and we are returning from executive session pursuant to Texas Government Code, Section 551.076. And no, there is no action. We're adjourned.